Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and he did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
down to earth,
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
and most importantly, honest,
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Isabel Webster. Thanks for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Thursday, the 10th of October. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Emily Carver.
Sun rises over the trail of devastation as Hurricane Milton continues to batter Florida. Right now, there are more than 3 million people without power after the monster storm tore through the Sunshine State. Still unclear how many people have died, but we know hundreds of homes have been destroyed.
And a secret victory plan. Has President Zelensky of Ukraine just divulged to Keir Starmer the way he plans to bring about an end to Russia's war? The new head of NATO is in Downing Street as we speak.
Red Tape Britain. Angela Rayner heads up north to sell her super-duper new workers' rights package. But while some employees may be happy, small business owners are slamming the government's rushed job as clumsy, chaotic and poorly planned, threatening employment and growth.
And police chair suspended. The head of the Metropolitan Police Federation is now under investigation after telling GB News about officers' fears of being accused of racism.
Robin Hood cancelled. Yes, woke finance bosses drop the Sherwood Forest hero from their logo, all because he's simply not inclusive enough.
Good grief. Yes, so there's finally this long-awaited workers' rights bill. Apparently it's going to protect employees from hostile employers, from evil, backward employers, the right to sue for unfair dismissal from day one, flexible working to become the default. But I was wondering whether our cabinet ministers, the Labour government, have any experience in business.
Well, do you know what? I looked at this before the general election, what was then the shadow cabinet. There was a briefing note put about.
Oh, yes.
10 of them, and this was in February, so there have been 1 or 2 changes. We haven't got the up-to-date, but 10 worked for trade unions, 10 for law firms, 6 predominantly work in government affairs for various lobbying companies. Not one at that stage had started their own business at any point in their lives. I wonder if that has fed into some of this decision, because it sounds great, right? I mean, if you can sue the company you work for letting you go on from day one, that sounds great if you're an employee. But if you're a business, why on earth would you take the risk of hiring someone? Particularly, why would you risk hiring someone that perhaps doesn't have as much experience or didn't go to the best university? Why would you take a chance on someone? Is if you have to let them go, they can sue you. From day one.
And this is very much the watered-down version. There was going to be a complete right to disconnect, wasn't there, which would be totally inappropriate for most industries, well, for a lot of industries. Oh, your boss calls you 1 minute after your end time. Just ignore him. That is your right. You can sue him if he insists on an answer. But I was looking, our business secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, I was looking at his CV, and he can, you know, get in touch if I've got anything wrong here.
Friend of the show, Jonathan Reynolds, lovely guy.
Yeah, lovely guy, I'm sure, and I'm sure he's competent in many ways. He's worked for the council, he trained as a solicitor, became a councillor, worked as a political assistant and was elected as an MP in 2010. And this is a man who's going to decide how businesses should be run in this country. Surely, 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 when it comes to something as important as business, you need someone who understands how they work.
No, it is interesting. They've
had some skin in the game.
spoken to a lot of trade unions, but have they spoken to any businesses, any employers, any entrepreneurs?
Say they have. They say they have. They say they have. And that's why it's been watered down a little bit. But we shall see. We're going to speak to a small business owner, I believe, who's got a strong feeling on this. Please get your views in, gbnews.com/your say. But let's get to the headlines with Sam Francis.
Tom, Emily, thank you very much and good afternoon to you. Fast approaching 5 minutes past 12. We'll start this hour with a recap from the United States, where Hurricane Milton is continuing to tear across Florida, knocking out now power to more than 3 million homes after it made landfall on the state's west coast earlier this morning. Storm-spawned tornadoes have also ripped through the state, destroying hundreds of homes. Video footage here shows one of those homes in Fort Myers with its roof torn apart. Elsewhere, video also shows torrential rain in Sarasota as the hurricane churned through the state. Earlier, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis said that time for safe evacuation is over, as millions have already fled the state. Well, this morning, wind speeds slowed, but still come in at a dangerous 90 miles an hour. And President Biden's called it one of the most destructive hurricanes in a century. He's also slammed what he called Donald Trump's reckless claims about the government's response. Well, you can have a listen now to what Donald Trump said about Biden's handling of the disaster so far.
This administration has not done a proper job at all. Terrible, terrible. Nobody's seen anything like it. But we just pray for everybody. We want them all to be good, and we're going to be there hopefully soon, and we're going to help them rebuild and get it all back together. And we hope that God will keep them safe. God will keep them safe.
And we'll just bring you a quick bit of breaking news. We're hearing from the investigation into the Gosport War Memorial Hospital in Hampshire. Police say they have identified 24 suspects in their investigation into the deaths of hundreds of patients at that hospital, the Gosport War Memorial Hospital, as I say, in Hampshire. In 2018, a report there found that over 450 lives were lost because of the use of opioids at that hospital in the years up until 2000, with another 200 patients affected but not killed. Operation Magenta, being led by the Kent and Essex Serious Crimes Division, has now reviewed, they say, the records of 750 patients and taken 1,200 witness statements. Of those 24 suspects, 21, we understand, are being interviewed for alleged gross negligence manslaughter, while the remaining 3 face charges under the Health and Safety Work Act. That news just into us. We will keep across it for you and bring you any more developments as we get them. Well, in the other NHS news this morning, figures out this morning show that hospital waiting lists in England have hit a 10-month high, with more than 3,300 patients waiting over 18 months for routine treatment. In A&E, meanwhile, nearly 39,000 people waited more than 12 hours in September before being admitted. That's a jump from August's figures. For emergencies like heart attacks and strokes, ambulances took an average of 36 minutes. That's nearly double the 18-minute target, while patients in urgent but less critical conditions waited over 2 hours for an ambulance, an increase from last month's figures. Millions of workers could gain new rights under the government's Employment Rights Bill, which promises the biggest overhaul of workers' protections in a generation. The bill would end 0-hours contracts, so-called fire and rehire practices, and extend parental leave from day one of employment. Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner says that changes will give workers more security, but some businesses are concerned about the practical impacts. Meanwhile, though, unions are welcoming the changes. which could affect up to 9 million people by 2026. Ministers say the details will be decided after further consultation. James Cleverly's elimination from the Conservative leadership race has shocked some within the party after he failed to gain enough votes. The secret ballot left many baffled within the party, with some MPs believing Cleverly was a sure win and switched their votes, but others point to stronger campaigns from his rivals. Now, the final two are Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick, both seen as representing the right of the party. Badenoch's backers see her as a rising star, while Jenrick is pushing hard as the underdog. Conservative members will now choose the next leader, with the winner set to be announced on the 2nd of November. Rachel Reeves may need to raise up to £25 billion from tax increases. That's according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Even with Labour's planned £9 billion of tax rises, the IFS is warning that to avoid cuts, the Chancellor will need to raise another £16 billion. Rachel Reeves has promised to avoid raising income tax, national insurance, VAT or corporation tax, but that does limit her options for now closing the gap. Experts say her upcoming budget on the 30th of October could be the most consequential since 2010. Police must and can do better at tackling antisocial behaviour. That's according to a new report. The police watchdog's calling for more neighbourhood officers, with many forces across England and Wales failing to respond consistently to incidents. Around 1 million antisocial behaviour cases were reported last year, with Inspector of Constabulary Lee Freeman stressing the need for early intervention and better training for officers. The government has pledged to restore the law and order on streets, with plans for new respect orders to target offenders. Well, the report made 8 recommendations urging police to regain public confidence. We've heard this morning that new allegations have surfaced against Mohammed Al-Fayed as 65 women came forward with claims of abuse dating back to 1977. Those allegations include sexual harassment, assault and rape following a BBC documentary that aired last month. Among the latest claims is a woman who alleged she was assaulted in Dubai, marking the earliest allegation so far. Harrods has confirmed that over 200 individuals are now in the process of settling claims with the business as the Met Police begins their investigations into those new allegations. Sir Keir Starmer has welcomed Volodymyr Zelensky to Downing Street as the Ukrainian president pushed for more support in the fight against Russia. The Prime Minister says it's a chance to talk through Kyiv's plans in more detail. Zelensky's also expected to press for permission to use long-range Storm Shadow missiles against Russia, something the UK, though, and the US have so far not approved. Well, despite mounting pressure, Downing Street maintains that its position on Storm Shadow missiles remains unchanged. And finally, Israel's retaliation against Iran will be lethal, precise and surprising. That is according to the Defence Minister Yoav Gallant following Tehran's recent missile attack last week. It comes after Joe Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu spoke for the first time since August, discussing a potential response and escalating situation in Lebanon and Gaza. Meanwhile, we've heard that 6 people were injured in a stabbing in northern Israel, and Israeli forces have killed 5 Palestinian West fighters in the West Bank. And we'll just stay on news from the Middle East for a few short moments. Breaking news just coming into us from Lebanon this hour. Israeli troops there have reportedly fired at 3 United Nations peacekeeping positions in the south of Lebanon. That is according to United Nations sources speaking to the Reuters news agency. And we're also hearing that in Gaza, reports of 28 people killed and 54 wounded in Israeli airstrikes on a school there sheltering displaced people. The Israeli military have confirmed that strike did indeed take place, though they are saying that it targeted militants who were operating in the school. Should those figures be correct, it would now bring the death toll in Palestine to now 42,000 killed in Gaza so far. Plenty more on that news and many more stories throughout the rest of this afternoon with Tom and Emily, and I can now hand you straight back to them.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 minutes past 12. Now, Hurricane Milton is continuing to tear through Florida, bringing tornadoes, floods and storm surges.
Yes, the hurricane made landfall at around 8:30 p.m. local time, knocking out power to more than 3 million homes.
Well, the Florida governor, Ron DeSantis, says the time for safe evacuation is over after millions fled the state.
OK, well, joining us now in the studio for the latest is GBNews Home Security Editor Mark White. Mark, it's very early in the morning, about 7 a.m. actually, so not that early. The sun will have risen and we'll see what exactly the devastation has been.
Yes, and this is the time when you can do that proper damage assessment. And the flooding, I think, in particular, will be of real concern. We know about the winds, and it had sort of lost some of its strength when it came across, but it was still packing a punch. I think we got some images of the Tampa Bay Rays Stadium, which, as you can see there, suffered very significantly. It's got a canvas roof over the top, and that was just shredded by the winds. This is in St. Petersburg, which is south of Tampa, and although the hurricane, when it came in, just took a last-minute sort of direction change and struck just south of Tampa, it still delivered very significant winds. And I think these images were from last night, as just before it got dark and clearly as the winds were beginning to impact that area. And as I say, what will be of real concern, I think, is the rainfall coupled with the tidal surge that we were expecting along the coastline. So the tidal surge on the west coast of Florida is believed to have been really quite significant. Now, the Hurricane Centre, the National Hurricane Centre, was predicting potentially up to 15-foot tidal surge. We don't believe that in most places, at least, it got anywhere near that high, but they're talking about 7 feet tidal surges in some areas, which is still clearly very significant.
Yeah, well, that would obviously take most first-floor rooms out of most homes. We haven't yet got the sunrise images that we were hoping for. We will bring them as soon as possible, obviously. But millions of people displaced. Do we have any idea of the scale of economic damage that will have been wrought across the Sunshine State?
Well, the economic damage, without a doubt, will run into billions of dollars. It always does in the event of a significant hurricane. And, of course, it's coming, you know, just on the heels of the devastation that was caused by Hurricane Helene, which cost, of course, more than 230 lives and caused billions of dollars of damage right across that area. In fact, one of the big concerns they had was that many of the streets were still sort of full of debris from Hurricane Helene. So it was there, just out in the open, waiting to be whipped up and sent in the path of other buildings or people that were foolish enough to have remained in that area. And we know that some did. Always, despite these evacuation orders, there are always people who decide, for whatever reason, that they want to ride out the storm. And often they are the individuals who get caught up in this and lose their lives, either in buildings with rising floodwater where they go to the upper levels and get trapped underneath the roofs, especially if it's not a high-rise building they're in. You know, they go up, they can't then punch their way out through the roof, so the water just rises and people get drowned that way. There's others, of course, get swept away by even just a few feet of water can have a very significant, powerful force, depending on if it's coastal water, if it's rainwater. And then there's the other issue, which they found during Hurricane Helene, quite a significant issue, and especially as we move towards more and more electric vehicles being used. Apparently, electric vehicles and salt water don't mix, go figure. But there have been real issues around the salt water corrosing and causing chemical reactions within the lithium-ion batteries in these electric vehicles that have been then combusting and causing vehicles to catch fire, houses to burn down, because, of course, it's electric scooters, it's golfing carts, of which there are many in the state of Florida as well, all at risk of catching fire.
Goodness me, there are so many levels to this. I was reading about a wealthy Florida mum, is what the Daily Mail called her, who's apparently been boasting about her hurricane-proof home, how she's going to see it out and all of that. Is it possible to have a hurricane-proof home?
Well, you might have a home that can withstand the winds, and in fact, most of the sort of concrete and brick-built buildings can probably manage to resist that to an extent. Maybe the roofs are vulnerable. But what you can't guard against, of course, is the flooding event. And we're talking about record levels of rainfall that this hurricane, because it sucked it up in the Gulf of Mexico and brought it in to Florida, and is currently dumping many, many inches of rain. And of course, in the coastal areas, combine that with the tidal surge. And then there's the other issue we're talking about. There's so many issues that this storm brings, of tornadoes. There have been at least 24 major tornadoes that were reported right across the state of Florida, and not just on that west coast where the hurricane first impacted, but right across on the east coast as well, and reports of, in some communities, cars overturned with people trapped inside, other people trapped under debris. So really now, as we get into the daylight hours, and the emergency services, who, like everyone else, will have been hunkering down for the storm to pass, can get out there, can do their job of trying to reach those that need rescued, recover those that unfortunately have succumbed to the storm.
Well, Mark, thank you very much for that. We'll, of course, be back with you as we get these new images of the sunshine state with the sun rising upon it.
Yes, indeed. But in Westminster, Sir Keir Starmer, he's been meeting with President Volodymyr Zelensky and also the new head of NATO today to discuss, apparently, Ukraine's secret plan to defeat Russia and Western support also for Kyiv.
Well, Starmer told the NATO chief, Mark Rutte, the new NATO chief, former Prime Minister of the Netherlands, that he had been meeting all morning, going through this plan for victory.
Yes, with Zelensky, he used the meeting to press for permission to use long-range Storm Shadow missiles against targets in Russia, something the UK and US so far have not approved.
Well, despite mounting pressure from the Ukrainian president, Downing Street maintains its position on Storm Shadow missiles remains unchanged. Curious to be giving all of these missiles and then prevent Ukraine from actually firing them.
OK, well, joining us now is Global Affairs correspondent at The Eye, Molly Blackall. Molly, thank you very much indeed for coming into the studio to discuss this. A big day for Keir Starmer, President Zelensky in town, and also the new NATO boss. What exactly has been discussed, as far as you know?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. I think they've been careful not to release an agenda, so we don't know exactly what's going to be discussed. Probably not a surprise with sensitive national security issues. I think there's going to be two main issues on the agenda for them this morning. The first is what you mentioned about the use of Storm Shadow missiles. So for a long time now, President Zelensky has requested that British-supplied weapons can effectively be fired into Russian territory. The concern from the US and the UK is that it would effectively drag the UK into the war directly. It might be seen by President Putin as an attack on Russia by the UK. So there's been a lot of hesitancy around using that. But as you alluded to, Tom, Zelensky's saying, well, these are the targets that we really need to hit. And so they want more access to be able to use those weapons. So that's one thing which will be no doubt contentious. The second issue is this all-important victory plan. So it's Zelensky laying out how he believes Ukraine can reach their path to victory. But I think there'll also be some discussions about potential concessions that Ukraine might have to make. You know, there have long been questions about what victory would look like, whether it would involve Ukraine leaving behind any of that territory which Russia has invaded, or whether victory can only be counted for Ukraine if they get all of the territory that's been occupied back.
Of course, this is all in the context of a United States presidential election which takes place in less than a month now. I suppose Zelensky, to some extent, is thinking this all has to be on a course to conclusion, perhaps by January, by an inauguration of potentially a very different White House.
Absolutely. That's, you know, totally not coincidental. I think that these talks are ongoing before that point. So the election's taking place, obviously, on the 4th of November. I'm heading out on Monday to cover it. And there are really big question marks for the future of Ukraine on this election. I mean, President Trump, if he's re-elected, he has been very critical in the past of the amount of money which the US has been giving to Ukraine. He said that he would sort out the Ukraine war within the first couple of days if he is re-elected, but he's not released how he might do that. So really his plans aren't quite clear, but certainly he's been very critical of the amount of funding being given, and he's also been very critical of NATO as an institution. You know, so I'm sure that will be of serious concern today.
Intrigued by this victory plan that may or may not have been divulged to Keir Starmer, would he give details of his military plans?
You would assume with very close allies who are supporting him, you know, quite extensively. I mean, you know, the UK's given 12.8 billion in aid to Ukraine. You would assume there's some sort of steer, but I think all of that depends on how far Ukraine has got with it. I mean, the situation on the battlefield is changing daily. You know, military sources of mine tell me actually things change within a couple of weeks. You know, new technologies being introduced on a sort of 6-week cycle almost. So the picture is changing so dramatically there that I think it's quite hard then for them to know what it will look like at a certain point. But we don't know if a timeline's been laid out. We don't know if Zelensky is planning any personal pushes forward on those fronts, or whether it's a sort of more reactionary situation to see how Russia progresses.
And presumably from Keir Starmer's perspective, politically as well, he needs to show that he is as much of a support to Ukraine as previous governments and prime ministers. Thank you so much, Molly. We'll have to leave it there. Molly Blackall, who is the Global Affairs correspondent at The Eye. Thank you very much.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Plenty more coming up on today's programme. Don't go anywhere. We're going to be talking about this new workers' rights package. Is it a workers' rights package enabling workers, or is it actually the biggest imposition on business since the 1970s?
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Please tell me that we're British. In our darkest hour, we can work around this. The beer will still be flowing at Christmas. Tell me, please.
Martin, without using bad language, there's no words to describe that this is another major blow to the hospitality sector. I wake up every day with anxiety thinking, what's going to happen to us now? Oh, my God, now the weather's against us. Not only are the government absolutely battering us, then the weather's now hitting us as well.
Kate Stewart, this can only mean one thing. Prices, once again, going through the roof.
And there's nothing we can do. We have on costs. We have to buy from the brewery. We have the VAT. We have then the VAT, what we take. It is an absolute nightmare. To be in the pub game now, Martin, is very, very difficult. And there's no light at the end of the tunnel. Everything just keeps hammering us from every different direction. And obviously, we have to pass that on to the customers, then price increases. There's nothing we can do. We don't want to sell beer at an inflated price. We want it as cheap as possible to get people through them doors. But we have no option. They're going to go up again in the new budget. You know, there's no help for us. What are we supposed to do, Martin, except the only option is to close the doors and say, enough is enough. We can't do this anymore. I absolutely cry my eyes out having to put the prices up, because you think, oh, my God, people are just going to turn away and walk. But we can't swallow the costs all the time, Martin. It's impossible for us to do, because we will go bankrupt. There has to be, there's inflation getting hammered on us yet again, and we have to pass it on. I feel it when I take my children out for something to eat. You're like, wow, that has just cost a fortune. But what is the answer? The answer is the government needs to look at saving the hospitality sector and stop being so greedy in everything that they take away from us, or there won't be pubs.
GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 28 minutes past midday. Now, more than 7 million workers will get new rights under government plans.
Yes, employees will be able to get statutory sick pay, parental leave and protection from unfair dismissal from day one in the workplace.
But while some workers and unions are welcoming the changes, the Federation of Small Businesses has described the legislation as a rushed job, clumsy, chaotic and poorly planned.
OK, we're joined by former Chief Economist at the Cabinet Office, Jonathan Portes. Jonathan, this has been a long time in the works, hasn't it? They've taken advice from all sorts of people. Have they potentially been listening to the unions more than the business world? What do you think?
I think this is a pretty good balance. The devil with labour market legislation and regulation is always in the detail, because, as you've implied, you have to trade off the desire to give greater rights to workers with the importance of giving businesses the flexibility they need to manage their workforces, because if you don't, you actually damage job prospects. And I think, on balance, this looks to me like a reasonably good compromise. We'll see. Some of this is still out for consultation, for example, so we'll see where exactly they land. But they have been listening to both sides, and the fact that you can hear some complaints from both sides and also some muttered assent from both sides, I think suggests that the balance is probably about right.
Hang on, why is there any assent from businesses at all? Surely, in a market economy, the way that you attract people to work at your company is by offering them lots of things. You don't need a sort of the government to say all of these rights must be delivered. I mean, we have 1 million job vacancies in this country.
If that were true, Tom, we wouldn't have a minimum wage. We wouldn't have protection from unfair dismissal at all. We wouldn't ban discriminating against. There's all sorts of reasons why the labour market doesn't work perfectly. Every labour market economist knows that, which is why we intervene in various ways.
But of course, one of the big arguments, one of the big arguments about all of these different issues, about, for example, what level you set the minimum wage at. It's obvious if you set the minimum wage at £200 an hour, you're going to have no employment at all. Whereas if you with everything like this, there is give and there is take, and I wonder if there's too much take in this instance, particularly on this idea that people might be taking their companies to court for being sacked from day one. If I was a company and I was thinking I could either hire this Oxbridge graduate who has worked at all of these different professional firms beforehand, or I can take a chance on this guy who hasn't gone to the best university but seemed really good in the interview but hasn't worked at this big firm beforehand. Maybe I'll take a chance on this person. Isn't legislation like this mean I'm going to take the safer bet rather than take the risk on the person that might have to be let go? Because it's going to be a lot harder to let bad people go.
Well, but remember, you get protection against unfair dismissal from day one. That does not mean companies cannot use a probationary period. So if I, for example, hired the two of you, I could, after 3 months, decide Tom's rubbish, I'm sacking him, Emily's okay, I'm keeping him. There would be no comeback for you against that. What I could not do was say, well, I'm sacking Emily because she's female and keeping Tom because I prefer men. That would be illegal. So the protection against unfair dismissal doesn't mean that that bosses can't dismiss people who don't work out.
Yeah, just lastly, do you think it's a problem that neither Angela Rayner nor the Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, have any experience in business?
I mean, I do think that, ministers, I frequently with ministers who had no particular previous experience of the subject that they were working in, both Conservative ministers and Labour ministers. And I don't think actually that is usually the main problem with ministers. If ministers are competent and can do their job, they can do their job regardless of their background. That's what we have civil servants, expert groups and the rest of it for.
Yeah, I just worry because Angela Rayner's been a unionist all her life. Clearly, we know where her priorities are when it comes to this, that perhaps they won't foresee unintended consequences on business. But we shall see how this plays out. We know this legislation has already been watered down quite a bit, so perhaps a balance will be struck. Jonathan Portes, thank you very much indeed, former chief economist at the Cabinet Office.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Plenty more coming up on today's programme. But what else are we doing?
Well, we're going to be looking at rather an alarming story, or at least some people are alarmed by it. There's a new advert campaign on Transport for London that is raising quite a few eyebrows. Apparently there's an Islamic preacher featured who's been banned from some countries. We'll get stuck into that next.
Tom, Emily, thank you very much and good afternoon to you. It is just after 12:30. The top story this afternoon, Hurricane Milton's continuing to tear across Florida, knocking out power to more than 3 million homes. That's after it made landfall on the state's west coast earlier. Storm-spawned tornadoes have also ripped through the state, destroying hundreds of homes, with video footage showing one of those houses in Fort Myers with its roof torn apart. Elsewhere, video has shown torrential rain in Sarasota as Milton churned through the state. Well, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis says the time for safe evacuation is over after millions fled the state. This morning, wind speeds did slow down slightly, but still came in at a dangerous 90 miles an hour. Here, police have identified 24 suspects in their investigation into the deaths of hundreds of patients at Gosport War Memorial Hospital in Hampshire. In 2018, a report found with another 200 patients affected but not killed. Operation Magenta, led by the Kent and Essex Serious Crime Division, has now reviewed the records of 750 patients and taken 1,200 witness statements. Well, of those suspects, 21 are being interviewed for alleged gross negligence, manslaughter, while 3 face charges under the Health and Safety at Work Act. In other news, NHS figures out this morning show hospital waiting lists in England have hit a 10-month high, with more than 3,300 patients waiting over 18 months for routine treatment. In A&E, nearly 39,000 people waited more than 12 hours in September before being admitted. That was a jump from August. And for emergencies like heart attacks and strokes, ambulances took an average of 36 minutes, nearly double the 18-minute target. And patients in urgent but less critical conditions waited over 2 hours, an increase from last month's figures. Robert Jenrick says the Conservatives must offer a complete break from Labour's failing agenda if he becomes leader. He's been delivering a speech at the Policy Exchange think tank in London this afternoon after making it into the final 2 of the Tories' leadership contest. He claimed there in that speech that Labour doesn't care about migration and urged that the party should leave the European Court of Human Rights and cap migration at tens of thousands. The former immigration minister also warned the Conservatives, he said, won't survive if they don't get serious about fixing immigration first. Israeli troops have fired on 3 UN peacekeeper positions in southern Lebanon, one of them the main base there, according to the United Nations. There's been no comment at this stage from Israel on that incident, but it does come after Hezbollah claimed it targeted an Israeli tank and then launched missiles at troops evacuating their wounded. Meanwhile, in Gaza, 28 people are believed to have been killed and 54 wounded after an Israeli airstrike hit a school in Gaza where displaced people are reported to have been taking shelter. The Israeli military has confirmed the strike, but said it was targeting militants operating from inside the school. And Sir Keir Starmer has welcomed Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky to Downing Street today as he continues to push for more support in the fight against Russia. The Prime Minister says that no war has ever been won by a single weapon, as discussions focused on the full range of aid that Ukraine says it needs heading into the winter. President Zelensky also discussed his victory plan, which he said aims for a just end to the war, and he thanked the UK for its continued defence support, including long-range weapons. That's the latest from me for now. I'll be back with you at 1 o'clock.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello, good morning and welcome to your GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Well, a fair amount of cloud in the south as some light rain clears, but there are plenty of bright spells today with a risk of showers, but it is going to be feeling much colder than of late. And the reason for this is that we're bringing in our air from the Atlantic, which is feeding in across the UK. And notice the squeeze in the isobars, so we've got plenty of brisk winds across the country. That cloud will stick around the south through much of the day with some outbreaks of light rain possible, but some bright spells elsewhere, still with the risk of showers. Plenty of showers, in fact, feeding into coasts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. And these could turn a little bit wintry across the Scottish Highlands too. And there will still be those blustery winds, particularly across any coasts and in any exposed areas too. So it is really going to be feeling rather chilly, particularly in that wind. As we head into this evening, still plenty of cloud across much of England and Wales, still with that risk of showers. But the main source of those showers is going to be moving in to coasts of Northern Ireland and Scotland. Still, once again, falling as sleet and snow even by this evening across Scotland. It's still fairly blustery under those showers too, so it will be feeling cold. Those showers are set to continue overnight across much of Scotland, Northern Ireland. Still a few around coasts, particularly those North Sea coasts. But across much of England and Wales, winds are going to be turning lighter, and there'll be plenty of clear skies, so likely to see some mist and fog and plenty of grass frost by the time we reach tomorrow morning. So another cold start to end the week. Still feeling cold in those winds across Scotland, but cloudier here and those showers feeding through too. On the whole, across much of England and Wales, after a cold start, there's going to be plenty of bright sunshine around. And with lighter winds too, it's not going to feel quite as cold, even though temperatures are fairly similar. But across Scotland still, we've got those showers merging into longer spells of rain, so a pretty damp day on offer here. So wrap up warm to enjoy the sunshine.
The latest GB News travel.
Northbound on the M1, a lane closure to emergency bridge repairs at junction 38 for Huddersfield. Traffic is coping well. Southbound on the M6, it's very slow. There's a lane closure to a vehicle fire just after junction 4 for Coles Hill. Very slow as a result. Westbound on the M27, slow to a lane closure after an accident from Hedge End at 7 through to Southampton Airport at junction 5. And in Surrey, the M23 at southbound seen a lane closure to barrier repairs 8 to 9 for Gatwick Airport. Traffic is coping well. It is slow though for the southbound side of the M5 due to flooding. A lane closure between 11A for Gloucester through to Quedgley and Hardwick at junction 12. And that's your very latest travel news.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 20 to 1. Now, the Metropolitan Police Federation chairman has been suspended. Yes, this after telling GB News that white officers were hesitating when dealing with ethnic minority Londoners.
Yes, Rick Pryor said that malicious racism investigations were causing officers to think twice before doing their jobs. Well, GB News understands that he was suspended for these comments, described as discriminatory by the Federation.
Well, let's speak with GB News national reporter Charlie Peters, who interviewed Rick Pryor. And Charlie, it was after your interview that this man got sacked.
That's right. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, not sacked, we should stress, under investigation. He's been suspended. You could say that he's spoken out of turn and that this was out-of-line commentary. But actually, many of his members and officers I've spoken to in the last 24 hours have told me that he is fairly and accurately representing the concerns of his members. 30,000 police officers in the Metropolitan Police are represented by the Federation.
Well, I believe we do have a clip of what he told you, Charlie. Let's see if we can listen to that now.
And the behaviour of certain individuals, it clearly falls below that of which society expects. I think it's incumbent on police leaders to support their officers who are charged with dealing with these type of incidents to come out and call out that behaviour. And I mean, the example of which I relate this to was the recent Croydon bus incident matter, where it was clear that the lady in question behaved poorly. It's a quite reasonable expectation of society that if you travel on transport, London transport, on the buses, the trains, you know that if you are asked to produce a valid ticket for travel, you show that ticket. Had that happened in this case, there would have been no incident. And so it was the behaviour of the lady in question that instigated the whole matter.
Now, Rick there was describing what he said was the racism of low expectations, where the Metropolitan Police's leadership, he said, were failing to call out poor behaviour of ethnic minority Londoners involved in confrontations or altercations with the police. He said for fear of being accused of racist, and also because they just thought it would be too controversial and they don't want to get into that sort of conversation. This, he said, was allowing more similar circumstances to go on. And the situation he was describing there, the Croydon bus fare evasion incident, a police officer was actually convicted of assault, a conviction that was overturned last week after he arrested a woman when he asked her to show that she'd paid her fare. The Met no longer supports the TfL revenue protection teams as a consequence of the controversy that generated. But when the PC's conviction was overturned, the Met said this was a divisive scenario. They didn't go out and criticise the member of the public who many say instigated that difficult situation. Now, he also said, Rick Pryor, in that interview, which is now under investigation and the cause of his suspension, that white officers were hesitating to get involved in these scenarios because they feared vexatious and malicious investigations by the Office for Police Conduct. Now, many officers I've spoken to in the last 24 hours have said that this is the view, not just in London, but across the country. And it's not just police officers saying this. This morning, I spoke to a former career criminal, Sicarius McGrath, who was a gun runner in the northwest of England for 15 years, an extortionist, in and out of prison several times. He actually ran a gun factory at one point. He told me that this is absolutely the case, and criminals are taking this as their advantage. They are deliberately selecting black kids to run drugs because they think that they're less inclined to be arrested. He told me that he recently met with an active gang member who's quite senior in the south of England who is using this tactic because he knows that police officers will not want to do this because it risks malicious investigation on the grounds that they could have been racist. Many officers and indeed criminals telling me today that Rick Pryor has been suspended and is under investigation for telling the truth.
Right. Well, OK, Charlie, thank you very much indeed for that update. This all happened rather quickly, hasn't it, since your interview? It'll be very interesting to see what comes of it, whether he does end up losing his job or whether they'll let him off. The reason, perhaps, whether it was because he was speaking publicly or was it just the content of what he had to say?
It does show that there is perhaps too much emphasis in the Metropolitan Police or in the Police Federation on what people are saying to the media rather than what is actually going on within the police, how policing is actually being carried out in this country. Charlie Peters, thank you so much for bringing us that. And of course, we'll be back with you as this story develops.
We absolutely will be. And coming up on today's show, Robin Hood cancelled for not being inclusive enough. We'll reveal details next.
This is Britain's news channel.
True crime is everywhere.
Yeah, next weekend, CrimeCon UK takes place in London. And joining us now to tell us more about that event and the true crime phenomena is former detective Stephen. How do you pronounce your surname? Keogh. Sorry, Stephen.
That's all right.
I should have texted you before.
No worries.
And Nancy, and again, Nancy, what's your surname?
Bourne.
Thank you. I'm showing my ignorance there, but thank you both for joining us. So, Stephen, you're a former top cop. Hope you don't mind me describing you as that. At CrimeCon and other events like that, do you get into sort of the semantics of the investigations and, you know, how... for example, how I was watching something the other night where somebody was unfortunately murdered, but you saw the crime scene investigators trying to work out from which side the person was attacked from. Did the knife come from the left-hand side or the right-hand side? Is it all that kind of stuff?
So for me, everything I've done since I've left the police is about sharing that knowledge of investigations, because if you watch TV, they get it wrong a lot. So what we try and do, I'm not the only police officer there, there's experts, so forensic scientists, psychologists, all from that investigative world. Just trying to get across, well, actually, this is how it's really done. This is what we do, not what you're going to see on telly. And I think that's really important. So for me personally, coming along to CrimeCon, I just look at the list of people that are there, honestly, and I'm proud to be associated with them. There are some fascinating people there. People who've really fought for justice for their children. People who are campaigning for victims, for survivors. So it's an event that. When you look at the name, you might think, oh, they're just going to sit there talking about serial killers and what they got up to. Couldn't be further than the truth. It's really about what goes on, how it impacts the victims, how the investigations are carried out. It's educational as much as anything.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, welcome back. This is Good Afternoon Britain. It is now 12:49, and Nottingham Building Society have taken the decision to axe Robin Hood from their logo as part of a rebrand to become more inclusive.
Well, the logo, which they've used since the 1980s, showed the infamous Sherwood Forest hero. Infamous or famous? I think he's a hero to some people. He's not infamous, is he? Do you reckon?
Controversial? Clearly he's controversial.
Anyway, it showed the Sherwood Forest hero known for stealing from the rich and giving to the poor.
Yes, can you be infamous and also a hero? Now, this has been replaced by a black N over a green background, a change which has been ridiculed by some customers.
Well, we're joined now by our East Midlands reporter Will Hollis for more on this story, because, Will, a lot of people will be fairly bemused by this.
Yes, well, Robin Hood is a story and a brand which is known not just in England, not just even here in Nottingham City, but the world over. And Robin Hood, whether it's Errol Flynn or Kevin Costner, is watched on TVs and films throughout generations of people growing up, and stories are told as well. And for the last 30 or so years, that Robin Hood image has been the logo of the Nottingham Building Society. A few years ago, they dropped the words Building Society, but under the name the Nottingham, they provided mortgages and savings accounts for people in this area and the wider East Midlands as well. But recently, they've decided that that Nottingham brand, that Robin Hood brand, the English folk legend, is not something that they want to take forward anymore, and instead they've gone for a new logo. You'll probably be able to see some of what the old logo looked like. It's quite simply Robin Hood with his typical pointy hat and his bow as well. But what was leaked to the press, to the Sun newspaper, was a blog statement which the Sun attributes to the bosses of the Nottingham Building Society, and it reads, "We've mixed our rich history with a modern twist. We want to reflect society as it is today. For us, that means championing inclusivity and celebrating financial diversity. They say that the world has changed, people bank in different ways, and that they need to reflect that. And apparently Robin Hood, the tale of a man who robbed from the rich to give to the poor, is not something that they want to associate with anymore. I've been asking people here in Nottingham, right in the heart of the city, what they think about the change.
Well, no, I think I prefer to keep it, actually. Yeah, I do, because it's Nottingham's noted for Robin Hood, isn't it? Yeah. So I think it's nice to keep some things without change, for a change.
I think it's very sad, actually, because we should fly the flag for Nottingham and Robin Hood. Very important.
They say it's because they want to be more inclusive and diverse for their different audiences.
It makes no difference. It's too, what's the word? Right on. I think if you've got a logo and it's a good logo, keep it.
I'm absolutely disgusted about it. Nottingham is all about Robin Hood. We've already had Nottingham City Council give up on the tales of Robin Hood because they don't want to know about the guy. It's just amazing that this has come down. Absolutely disgusted.
Well, the Robin Hood brand and tourism, people visiting this part of the world, Nottingham and Nottinghamshire, brings around £2 billion into the local economy, particularly for tourism. But the Building Society says that they want people to ensure that people, wherever they are, don't just think that Nottingham, they only serve Nottingham customers. They want people around the country to also be their customers. Here is a statement from the Nottingham Building Society. We are incredibly proud of our roots and 175 years of history in Nottingham. We celebrate that while recognising that people today have a much broader range of financial needs than ever before, and it is important that we evolve to meet their needs. And finally, they say our new brand reflects our commitment to building for the future for both our customers in Nottingham and those right across the UK. Too many hard-working people are currently excluded from traditional lending decisions, and we are determined to address this. Lots of people in Nottingham are quite unhappy about this, but some people, they are indifferent.
Will Hollis, there in Nottingham for us. The new logo, it's just a squiggly little N.
All logos are just sort of squiggly?
No, it's very unimpressive compared to that nice one. Also, things are going wrong in Nottingham. The Guy Fawkes Night bonfire has been cancelled by the council because it's bankrupt. So yes.
Oh yes,
lots of English traditions.
Council is one of those councils that's gone bankrupt, isn't it?
Yeah. Well,
although
there you go.
I have to say, if I was putting all my money in a bank associated with with a figure that took money away from people to give to people who didn't, maybe I wouldn't bank with
It's a bit too socialist for Tom. Bits too socialist. We've got lots more coming up today's show. We are going to be checking in with our political editor, Christopher Hope, after yesterday's shock results for the Tory leadership.
A chilly start will give way to a lovely, warm afternoon. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good morning and welcome to your GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Well, a fair amount of cloud in the south as some light rain clears, but there are plenty of bright spells today with a risk of showers, but it is going to be feeling much colder than of late. And the reason for this is that we're bringing in our air from the Atlantic, which is feeding in across the UK. And notice the squeeze in the isobars, so we've got plenty of brisk winds across the country. That cloud will stick around the south through much of the day with some outbreaks of light rain possible, but some bright spells elsewhere, still with the risk of showers. Plenty of showers, in fact, feeding into coasts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. And these could turn a little bit wintry across the Scottish Highlands too. And there will still be those blustery winds, particularly across any coasts and in any exposed areas too. So it is really going to be feeling rather chilly, particularly in that wind. As we head into this evening, still plenty of cloud across much of England and Wales, still with that risk of showers. But the main source of those showers is going to be moving in to coasts of Northern Ireland and Scotland. Still, once again, falling as sleet and snow even by this evening across Scotland. It's still fairly blustery under those showers too, so it will be feeling cold. Those showers are set to continue overnight across much of Scotland, Northern Ireland. Still a few around coasts, particularly those North Sea coasts. But across much of England and Wales, winds are going to be turning lighter better and there'll be plenty of clear skies, so likely to see some mist and fog and plenty of grass frost by the time we reach tomorrow morning. So another cold start to end the week. Still feeling cold in those winds across Scotland, but a cloudier here and those showers feeding through too. On the whole, across much of England and Wales, after a cold start, there's going to be plenty of bright sunshine around. And with lighter winds too, it's not going to feel quite as cold, even though temperatures are fairly similar. But across Scotland still, we've got those showers merging into longer spells of rain, so a pretty damp day on offer here. So wrap up warm to enjoy the sunshine.
We can expect clear skies, leading to a light and warm day ahead. Lovely. Boxed Solar.
This just fun. Good luck.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Young adults spend a few years living away from home at university, those who go to university, but many then have no choice but to move back in with their parents because of the rising cost of renting.
But is this an excuse, and are Gen Z or Z just being lazy?
No, I mean, what do you make of it, Debbie? Because we do have to have some sympathy, don't we, in that, you know, rents are very high, it's very hard to get a mortgage, there are issues there.
I think the push towards young people to go to university as well is not necessarily the right thing for a lot of people, and I think people should start work early. These guys leave their universities with a huge amount of debt, no jobs, or huge rent, you know what I mean? It's just ridiculous. So I think we've got to look at the work ethic and start it younger. Because I think it's so easy just to move back with your mum and dad, isn't it?
To speak like a Gen Zer, they would say that, well, it's OK for your generation, you had it easy.
Realistically, that isn't quite that true, because a lot of people then didn't go to university. This is a relatively new thing that everybody goes to university.
I have to say, what strikes me today is that you still have, amongst all these problems, not having enough money, going to university when perhaps you shouldn't be, all these sort of issues, you still get all these people saying, well, I'm going to have a year out.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely. And I think the thing is, they say, oh, it was easy for you, but it wasn't really. We still had to rent places.
But the thing is with this debate, Debbie, is the generation we're talking about, Gen Z, who we're accusing of being lazy, have been raised by our generation.
Yeah.
So what have we done wrong that, if they are lazier, has made them like that?
GB News, the People's Channel.
Well, good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Thursday, the 10th of October. I'm Emily Carver.
And I'm Tom Harwood.
Well, the sun rises over a trail of devastation as Hurricane Milton continues to batter Florida. Right now, more than 3 million people are without power after the monster storm tore through the Sunshine State. Still unclear how many people have died, but we know hundreds of homes have been destroyed.
Red Tape Britain. Angela Rayner heads up north to sell her super-duper new workers' rights package. But while some employees may be happy, small business owners are slamming the government's rushed job as clumsy, chaotic and poorly planned, threatening growth and employment.
And outrage over TfL ads. Sadiq Khan's Transport for London is under fire over billboards featuring a controversial Islamic preacher and a Russian-linked fighter. What's all this about?
Braverman's speech cancelled. Yes, the former Home Secretary is forced to call off a speech at Cambridge University after a pro-Palestinian group threatened to boycott and protest the event. Ironic, isn't it, that on the day that Parliament debated free speech at universities, yes, that was an urgent question this morning in the House of Commons, on that very day, a sitting member of Parliament has effectively been blocked from speaking at a university.
Doesn't the new government not want to go through with the previous government's free speech in universities bill? They were going to bring in new legislation to try and stop this type of thing.
It's more than that. It's an act. It's an act of Parliament. So it passed under the previous government, and yet one of the first things the new Education Minister did was disapply that act. That's the government working against Parliament. I mean, if they want to repeal the act, they should do that in Parliament. But the government can't just ignore the Freedom of Speech Act that was passed by the previous government that puts a duty on the government to ensure there is freedom of speech at our universities. I mean, it's...
Well, there isn't freedom of speech at our universities, really, are there? I mean, any sort of right-of-centre academics who voice their opinions seem to have to move pretty quickly to another university. Anyway, Suella Braverman, she says, I was due to speak at Cambridge University today. Sadly, the event was cancelled because of militant pro-Palestinian protesters and the security risk they posed to the attendees and me. Intimidation and thuggery have no place on campus or in our democracy. We see so much of this. So much of this.
We do, and it was only last week on the show that we were talking about the Durham Union at Durham University not being able to hold debates unless they signed up to some new code where speakers had to go through approval and all the... I mean, am I too naive here to think that if there are a group of students at a university who want to invite a speaker to speak to that group of students at university, they should be allowed to do so? I mean, is that such a radical view?
I mean, we could have the debate about where the line is. I mean, should you have a terrorist on or someone who's a hate preacher or something like that? Well, there you go, that's a view. Cambridge for Palestine say that she has hyper-authoritarian populist policies on migration, policing and protest, and she represents everything we stand against. Of course, she says, we will not platform the far right. So there you go.
Well, I mean,
why not challenge her? Why not turn up and challenge her?
Why not? Why not? I mean, have you seen the story in France about Osama bin Laden's son, who's just been kicked out of the country because he's been... I'd love to challenge that guy at a university. That would be fantastic. I mean, why do people have to always listen to people with whom they agree or who aren't objectionable? I mean, isn't sort of academic liberty meant to be challenging and objectionable?
Not how it works, though, is it? Our students are extremely authoritarian. They're exactly what they claim others are. Anyway, gbnews.com/your say. We're going to get into that story, find out a little bit more about what exactly has been happening at Cambridge University. But it's your headlines with Sam Francis.
Very good afternoon to you from the newsroom. The top story this lunchtime. 3 million homes are without power across large parts of Florida as Hurricane Milton sweeps across the state. Flash flood alerts have also been issued and a number of emergency workers in Florida have been forced to suspend their operations due to the storm. And storm-spawned tornadoes have also ripped through the state, destroying hundreds of homes. Footage here shows one of those homes in Fort Myers with its roof torn apart. And elsewhere, video shows torrential rain in Sarasota as Milton churned through the state. You can see there the latest images of the satellite picture as the hurricane tracks its way across the Florida coast. Earlier, the governor, Ron DeSantis, says the time for safe evacuation is over after millions have already fled the state. And this morning, wind speeds did slow slightly, but still came in at a dangerous 90 miles an hour when it made landfall. Well, President Biden's called it one of the most destructive hurricanes in a century, while slamming what he called Donald Trump's reckless claims about the government's response. Here's Donald Trump speaking about Biden's handling of the disaster so far.
This administration has not done a proper job at all. Terrible, terrible. Nobody's seen anything like it. But we just pray for everybody. We want them all to be good, and we're going to be there hopefully soon, and we're going to help them rebuild and get it all back together. And we hope that God will keep them safe. God will keep them safe.
And we'll just quickly take you to a live view of the Tropicana Field Stadium where the roof there collapsed. I believe we should have pictures of the scene there. Just one of many clips coming into us, steadily emerging, giving us a glimpse of the devastating power of this hurricane. You can see there the stadium roof all but torn apart, just remnants left following the latest devastating power brought by that hurricane in Florida. Any more videos that we get coming into us in the newsroom, we will, of course, bring to you. In other news, police have identified 24 suspects in their investigation into the deaths of hundreds of patients at Gosport War Memorial Hospital in Hampshire. In 2018, a report found over 450 lives were lost there because of the use of opioids. That was at the hospital until 2000, with another 200 patients affected but not killed. Operation Magenta, led by the Kent and Essex Serious Crime Division, has now reviewed the records of 750 patients and taken 1,200 witness statements. Well, Well, of those 24 suspects, 21 are currently being interviewed for alleged gross negligence manslaughter, while the remaining 3 are facing charges under the Health and Safety at Work Act. NHS figures out this morning show hospital waiting lists in England have hit a 10-month high, with more than 3,300 patients waiting over 18 months for routine treatment. In A&E, nearly 39,000 people waited more than 12 hours in September before being admitted. That was a jump from August's figures. And for emergencies like heart attacks and strokes, ambulances took an average of 36 minutes. That's double the 18-minute target. Millions of workers could gain new rights under the government's Employment Rights Bill, which promises the biggest overhaul of workers' protections in a generation. The bill would end zero-hours contracts, so-called fire and rehire practices, and extend parental leave from day one of employment. The Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, says the changes will give workers more security, but some businesses are concerned about the potential impact. Meanwhile, unions have welcomed the move, which could affect up to 9 million workers by 2026. But ministers say more details are still to be decided after further consultation. Rachel Reeves may need to raise up to £25 billion from tax increases to keep public spending rising, according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Even with Labour's planned £9 billion of tax rises, the IFS is warning that to avoid tax cuts, the Chancellor will need to raise another £16 billion. Rachel Reeves has also promised to avoid raising income tax, national insurance, VAT or corporation tax, limiting her options for closing the gap. Experts say her first budget, coming up on the 30th of this month, could be the most consequential since 2010. Police must and can do better at tackling antisocial behaviour. That's according to a new report. The police watchdog is calling for more neighbourhood officers, with many forces across England and Wales failing to respond consistently. Around 1 million antisocial behaviour cases were reported last year, with the Chief Inspector stressing the need for early intervention and better training for officers. The government's pledged to restore law and order on the streets, with plans for a new respect order to target offenders. The report made 8 recommendations urging police to regain public confidence. UK pharmaceutical giant GSK will pay almost £1.7 billion to settle claims that a discontinued version of its heartburn drug, Zantac, caused cancer. The settlements cover around 90% of all cases filed by around 80,000 claimants in the UK. Well, Zantac was pulled from the shelves in 2020 after regulators linked an ingredient in the drug to potential cancer risks. And finally, some sports news. Rafael Nadal, the King of Clay and 22 Grand Slam champion, has announced his retirement from tennis. The 38-year-old Spaniard will make his final appearance at the Davis Cup finals in Malaga this November, and his retirement marks the end of an extraordinary career, including, of course, his 2 Wimbledon wins. Those are the latest headlines for now. I'll be back with you in half an hour. Now, though, it's over to Tom and Emily.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 1:10. Now, Hurricane Milton is continuing to batter Florida, killing a number of people and leaving 3 million homes without power.
Yes, officials are now starting to assess the scale of the damage, but residents are still being urged to stay indoors, even if they are in areas where the hurricane has passed.
Well, joining us in the studio for the very latest is GB News' very own Mark White. Mark.
Well, the remnants of Hurricane Milton have now left the state of Florida, and it's barrelling off, such as it is, Category 1, soon to be tropical storm, off into the Atlantic, but it has left a lot of destruction. As you would understand and believe at this point, they are now in the process, now that we are in the daylight hours, of being able to assess what that damage is. I think we've got some live shots, have we? I don't know if those are live shots or not, but...
These are live pictures, although the water doesn't look 15 feet.
No, we have had storm surge that has been quite high, but we're talking 6 or 7 feet in most places along the west coast where the hurricane came in. You know, coupled with the wind and the very significant rainfall, we're talking 8, 9, 10 inches in some places, which is actually 3 times the average rainfall for the entire month of October, and that's fallen within a few hours. So that's caused very significant flooding issues.
But Mark, am I right in saying this storm didn't hit exactly where people were expecting it to hit? So a lot of our live shots where we were thinking this would be the centre of the storm, the greatest devastation, are actually slightly off from where it actually struck.
Yes, well, it was initially predicted to hit smack bang into Tampa, that very significant centre of population with 3 million people in the greater metropolitan area of Tampa, but it actually swung at the last minute just a bit south of Tampa. But having said that, Tampa still got hit pretty hard, and particularly south of Tampa and St. Petersburg. I think we've got the images there of the Tampa Bay Rays baseball stadium, Tropicana Fields, where the canvas roof of that stadium has just been shredded, and inside the stadium as well was being used as a staging area for the emergency services and the National Guard. So they had to deal with that on top of, obviously, when they were hunkering down then. As it's now passed, they begin that search and rescue operation, and there are, across the West Coast in particular, at the moment, they are doing waterborne rescues because there's still quite a significant amount of flooding, people trapped inside buildings. But it's not just on the west coast of Florida. This thing has barreled right across the state of Florida and has spawned, now we're told, more than 35 tornadoes of significant strength to cause very serious damage and loss of life in St. Lucie County, which is on the west coast, on the east coast of Florida, on the Atlantic coast. They're now confirming 4 fatalities there. We think most of them were in a caravan park and they were struck by one of the 35 tornadoes.
Wow, and 3 million people or thereabouts evacuated over the last couple of days. Presumably they're still being told to stay away from the area. Huge concerns over the state of their homes. As we hear, hundreds of homes have been virtually destroyed. How long do you reckon it'll be before they're given the all clear to go home and see what they're left with? Well,
it could be some significant time. It will depend on just how badly damaged the area is that they live in. But this moment, even though the storm has passed, is still a very precarious moment in terms of the potential dangers in these areas, particularly flooded areas. There are downed power lines that cause clearly a particular problem. There are 3 million homes currently without power because of those downed power lines. We've even got alligators that have been spotted in the waters. We know there are many alligators around Florida anyway, obviously in the marshes and things like that. But you can see from the images there from one of NBC's affiliates, the gaping jaws of that alligator there coming up through the floodwater. So some very real concern. You don't go wading in and around the floodwater around your property because, you know, as well as things, you know, wreckage that could cut you very significantly underwater, and that will be a lot of it mixed in with sewage, so, you know, could really cause you serious harm medically if you get caught in or cut in kind of diseased water. There's also these alligators to contend with.
Gosh, imagine returning to your home to see it flooded and there's an alligator just swimming around. Terrifying.
Unimaginable. And looking at these palm trees just completely collapsing there, it really does look like Milton has brought a paradise lost.
Mark White.
Very good, yes.
Thank you very much. Been waiting to do that all day.
Yeah. You're the first and only person to have said that, aren't you, Tom? Mark White, thank you very much indeed for bringing us the very latest from Florida, the Sunshine State.
Yes. Well, much more to come. The next leader of the Conservative Party will either be Kemi Badenoch or Robert Jenrick, as Conservative members start voting in an online ballot from today.
The ballot is open. Yes, yesterday's shock results saw James Cleverly eliminated, despite leading the previous round, with reports that perhaps some tactical voting backfired.
Well, campaigns are intensifying with just 3 weeks to go. Just 3 weeks? Still 3 weeks. In a speech this afternoon, Robert Jenrick continued to push his hardline stance on immigration.
Hang on, Tom. You've got still 3 weeks.
3 weeks?
And the online voting is already open. Why do people need 3 weeks?
Well, one of the things is Robert Jenrick is saying that this contest should be shortened.
Yeah.
Because currently it doesn't finish until after the budget.
That doesn't make sense.
So it would be weirdly Rishi Sunak responding to the budget rather than the new leader.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense in my mind. GBNews political editor Christopher Hope was at Robert Jenrick's speech today, and he joins us now. Christopher, there must be a bit of a spring in Robert Jenrick's step, and of course Kemi Badenoch's as well. Just to be reminded that there's still 3 weeks for people to vote online for Tory party members, anyway. It's a long game, isn't it?
With members on Thursday next week, just in time for GB News' leadership event, the only one agreed so far, featuring Robert Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch next Thursday night, 7 p.m. Mark your cards, be there live on GB News. But right now, we've seen Robert Jenrick hit the ground running after yesterday, gave a speech here in central London. He's talking about how the party has no future, he says, unless it comes out, we all come out as a country from the ECHR, the European Convention on Human Rights. He says it's leave or remain, and he's for leave. We can't dodge big decisions, he told audience just now, and we have to cap net migration at tens of thousands or even fewer than that. He won't cut emissions on the backs of working people, and he says we can't concrete over the countryside when the best way to generate economic growth is to build in cities. But I asked him for GB News earlier, are you willing to sacrifice economic growth if it means controlling immigration? And here's what he had to say.
Chris, I think that's a false choice. As I've set out consistently, I don't believe the age of mass migration has made any of us richer. In the 25 years since Tony Blair became Prime Minister, 5.9 million people net have come into our country. And yet this has been an era marked by low economic growth and poor productivity growth. I think it has stopped companies from investing in the skills and the technology that are needed to support British workers and to drive our economy forwards, as well as putting massive pressure on housing and public services. So I think we can do better than that. What I want to do is end mass migration and fire up our economy. We'll need to work on our skills policy, on welfare reform, bring things together in a serious plan. That is what I offer. It's a big change, but it's one that is in the national interest for our country.
That's Robert Jenrick there with his big offer. Now, Kemi Badenoch is campaigning today with a Tory council ahead of a local by-election and meeting with her team. So she's having a quiet start to this run-in to November the 2nd. But with me now is Charlie Rowley, known to our viewers as a commentator on Tory politics. Charlie, how can Robert Jenrick unite the party, given the party MPs are split 3 ways?
Well, I think, as you say, he hit the ground running this afternoon, didn't he? He was in Suffolk last night, I think, after the drama that happened in Westminster, and then he's come into London today to deliver that speech. And I think the way in which he would say he would unite the party is by setting out policies. So he was talking about immigration today, specifically having a very clear plan about that, cutting immigration, capping immigration to bringing it down from the hundreds of thousands to the tens of thousands. And the platform he was putting forward was also leaving the EHCR. So he's making this effectively another referendum on leave or remain when it comes to the EHCR. But what he's effectively saying is that, look, he's got plans on immigration, on housing, on the economy, and it's those policies that, if he gets the backing of the members, that will unite the parliamentary party behind him.
And by going early, he's almost setting the agenda for the debate. So he's setting up questions that we have to ask Kemi Badenoch. Is that why he's done this?
I think that's absolutely right. I think he's trying to take back control of the campaign. I mean, he had 41 MP backers, Kemi had 42, so there's nothing really in that. So he is now trying to take control of this campaign, seize the momentum, be the candidate that's buzzing with ideas that, as you say, means that other candidates, in this case it's only Kemi left, will have to play catch-up. But, in her own right, she's sort of saying, well, hold on, it's about principles first, policy later. But I think the more that you hear from Rob Jenrick, and the more policies that are put out there, the more a buzz, actually, you'll see the membership sort of, having those conversations about whether they're the right policies or not. And that might just be what gets him over the line.
The party is broadly split, 40-40-40, give or take a few MPs. Would it be wise to have a final vote now so members can see which of these two candidates has the most backing of MPs to ensure that that might reflect in the vote?
I think that's something that definitely the party's got to look into. I mean, even on the previous leadership election with Penny Mordaunt, it would be interesting to see where her votes ended up in the final ballot. But, the party is effectively split three ways on the back of last night's vote. But, we've now got a final two. Where would those MPs that voted for James, where would they land if you're a complete unknown? And bearing in mind we've got two candidates on the right of the party, if you're a member that doesn't really know who to vote for, those indicative votes could be helpful in making up those members' minds.
And just finally, both these candidates are pitching to the right, but of course votes are won in the centre. When will either of them start showing more to the left or the centre-left of this country?
Well, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, there's you've got to win back if you're Conservative. You've got to win back the trust of the British people. They didn't listen to the Conservatives at the last election because of the failures that they made, particularly on immigration. So I think that's why Rob Jenrick was making that his central pitch today. But it's got to be laden with also that hope and optimism. So talking about housing, talking about the future of young people, talking about reforming public services in education and the health service. What are we doing to create wealth in this country, to create jobs and opportunities and apprenticeships? That's something I think both candidates will have to set out. But it's whether they do it, whether they can do it in the space of a month, whether they'll be doing it next week on GBNews, which I'll certainly be tuning into. So they've got to, I think, offer the membership that hope and optimism, as well as taking on the difficult decisions that is largely seen as a right-wing issue, which is immigration.
Charlie Rowley there with the question that both parties must answer: when do they start tacking into the middle ground?
Really, really big questions there. And of course, Chris, excellent to get that plug in. It's just a week to go until the moment they go head-to-head here on GB News. Thanks for joining us.
Fantastic stuff. I'm looking forward to that. See how they go up against one another. We haven't really seen that yet, have we?
No, we haven't. They've actually been very, very controlled because of this yellow card system, because of all of the restrictions that the Conservative campaign headquarters have placed on this leadership contest. There have been no TV debates so far. GB News will be the first, the significant one.
Who's hosting? Is it Christopher?
I wouldn't possibly.
It is Christopher, yes, it is Christopher. He's going to be hosting that head-to-head battle. I wonder if they'll go at each other.
There's going to be a spin room as well.
Oh, a spin room. Yeah. Well, there you go. Excellent. Good stuff.
Whole big thing.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. We've got lots more coming up on today's show. Yes, Sadiq Khan's Transport for London is under fire over ads featuring a controversial Islamic preacher who's been banned from some countries, and also a Russian-linked fighter. How did that make it onto our underground?
Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg's State of the Nation, Monday to Thursday from 8 p.m.
You must be so proud of your daughter being so just amazingly brave and a model for other people who face illness.
I think we're proud of her all day, every day, and always have been. Liz has always given her all to anything she put her mind to, whether that was studying for her GCSE exams at school or whether it's been her photography and battling cancer. Liz never does anything by half, and we are so incredibly proud of her each and every day.
And Liz, I noticed a wonderful line from you saying that when you've got cancer, A-levels don't matter so much. That seems to me to be a very reasonable view to take, and has given you then the chance to do these other amazing things that you will be doing more of in future with the London Ambulance Service. And I imagine many people will want to help you with your bucket list because they've now seen you and seen how brave you are.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully we've already been overwhelmed by the responses and the support by so many people. I think when my mum originally posted the list, it received like 4,000 replies. it was insane, and still there's more. So from the bottom of our hearts, and especially mine, we just want to say thank you, because there's nothing that forces anyone to get in touch and say, hey, I have something you can do, pop over and do this or that, or it's just out of the generosity of their hearts. So thank you.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, you didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 27 minutes past 1. Now, Transport for London is under fire for a series of adverts featuring a controversial Islamic preacher who's been banned from entering Singapore.
Yes, so the advertisements for the finance firm Wahed also feature a controversial UFC fighter, Khabib, who has links to Russian warlords closely allied with Putin. OK.
Well, questions are being asked about TfL's vetting process, as earlier this year, adverts showing the comedian Ed Gamble eating a hot dog were removed for promoting obesity.
OK, well, a TfL spokesman said this advert was reviewed and found to comply with our advertising policy. GB News has also approached the financial firm Wahed for comment.
When asked about this issue this morning by the London Assembly member Susan Hall, Mayor Sadiq Khan didn't really have much to say. Take a listen.
Chair, I'm not aware of the advert. I'll look at it as soon as Mayor's question time is finished to see what's going on there. I'm more than happy to look into that and get back to the member.
Please do, because I think things like that just make the whole thing look totally ridiculous.
OK, well, we're delighted to say we have Susan Hall with us now. Susan, thank you very much indeed. Tell us a little bit about this advert then. What's the problem that you've identified?
Well, I think the whole situation is ridiculous. All sorts of foods are banned on TfL adverts, which I didn't agree with in the first place. As an example, you're not allowed to put anything that's got fat or sugar or all sorts of things on it. So you go on the underground and you see very little food whatsoever. You come up on, for instance, Westminster, and there's a wonderful stall full of cupcakes that you can buy. So it's just a nonsense, quite frankly. But it was very irritating to find out that they won't allow a hot dog, as it were, to be pictured on there. And yet this chap, Mufti Menk, I think is his name, he's known to have denounced homosexuality as filthy and has said that gays were, and I'm quoting, of course, worse than animals. So TfL have been questioned and said that this passes through quite happily through its procedures. How can that be right? And yet putting God forbid you should put a hot dog on an advert. I mean, it's all damn ridiculous, Emily. Ridiculous.
No, it does seem that there's the hypocrisy charge there. I mean, or perhaps it isn't hypocrisy at all. I remember when these Beach Body Ready adverts were banned because they showed women in bikinis. I mean, maybe that's we all just need to sort of shroud ourselves over and not. I mean, maybe that's consistent. But I suppose the argument here, there could be an argument made that this is a financial services company. It's allowed to advertise its financial services. It's allowed to have whoever it wants on its advert to promote that. I mean, surely it's a conservative position to say yes, private business advert, fine.
I think it's more along the lines that people like me, my group, the Conservatives, have fought this nonsense over what is allowed and what's not allowed. We don't agree with banning all sorts of things. So if you're going to ban a hot dog, but allow somebody that regards gays as worse than animals, then I'm sorry, you've got something very wrong with your policy, I would say.
Yeah, he was reportedly also banned for 2 years from Denmark, which is very interesting. As to why we'd have an advert allowed in Britain for a man who's been banned from both Singapore and Denmark, it is rather curious. I don't think it's wrong to raise this to Sadiq Khan. Do you have faith that he'll look into it?
No, of course not. I mean, somebody else might pick up on it. He just fobs you off with all sorts of things. I asked him as an example, and it's a separate subject, but I know you've been interested in it. I asked him also whether he tried to persuade the police to give outriders to Taylor Swift, and he sort of avoided that. He inferred that he actually hadn't, but he never gives straight answers. It's like banging your head against a brick wall. But going back to this advertising, it's so damn ridiculous that somebody Ed Gamble had to have a hot dog photoshopped out and I believe a cucumber put in its place. Ooh.
Oh, Susan, are you okay? It was just the camera, not you.
No, I'm okay. My computer collapsed. I do apologise. No, that's how cross I am, quite frankly.
Well.
It's all ridiculous.
No, it really does. It really does highlight it when you contrast the sort of controversial preacher on an advert. That's okay, but not a controversial hot dog. That's beyond the pale.
Dog, never a hot dog. And God forbid you should put a wedding cake or something like that. I think that's been banned as well in the past. I mean, this just shows the stupidity of TfL. Quite frankly, I'd probably put everything on there. But if they're going to be picky, don't put up these people that are. Say the sort of things that this chap has said.
Yes, God forbid you have a female bodybuilder in a bikini. Oh, terrible. Thank you very much.
No, don't do that.
Thank you very much indeed, Susan Hall. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Plenty more coming up on today's programme, including the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. She's had to cancel a speech at Cambridge University. It's all to do with protests. We'll have the details after this.
Very good afternoon to you. It is just after 1:30. First to the latest coming to us out of the United States this hour, and people are still being ordered to stay indoors, even as Hurricane Milton moves away after smashing its way across Florida. Powerful winds ripped off the roof of a stadium, and a storm spawned tornadoes also tore through the state, destroying hundreds of homes. Well, we can now take you live to Florida, where the Governor, Ron DeSantis, is giving a news conference on the situation there. Let's take a quick listen in.
Over 125 active missions in 26 different counties. Over 6,500 soldiers are deployed throughout the state. Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission has made land and water rescues in Pinellas, Hillsborough, and Pasco County. The State Guard has also been engaged in search and rescue, assisting with floodwater evacuations as well as damage assessments. There are currently 3.1 million accounts without power. There have been 635,000 restorations since Hurricane Milton hit Florida. The areas that have the most significant outages as of this morning are Hillsborough, 75% out, Hardy, 97% out, Manatee, 82% out, Pinellas, 68% out, and Sarasota, 75% out. Of course, there are 50,000 plus linemen that have been pre-staged. A lot of what they'll do this morning is likely assess the damage and then begin restoration operations very quickly, and we appreciate everybody that's in that fight because that's very important for a lot of people. Cut and toss have begun at first light by the Florida Department of Transportation. 328 crews are active in the field with over 350 pieces of heavy equipment and trucks. 150 bridge inspectors were dispatched at first light and have begun performing inspections to open bridges across the impact areas. As I put in my executive order, residents have a right to be back into their homes as soon as the roadways are deemed safe. In Tampa, the Gandy Bridge and Howard Franklin Bridge have been inspected, cleared, and are open, and inspections of the Sunshine Skyway Bridge are underway. There is debris on the Sunshine Skyway as well as the Courtney Campbell, but once that debris is clear, we anticipate those bridges opening later this morning. Other bridges are being opened as soon as the state inspections are completed. The Tampa Airport is repairing minimal damage and should be open no later than tomorrow. Seaports are awaiting Coast Guard channel surveys to reopen waterside, but as of now, our initial assessments is they will likely be able to resume operations very quickly. We still have a lot of school closures for today. I think Floridians should just keep in contact with their local officials about what that's going to be. I would imagine a lot of the schools that were not necessarily in the direct path of the storm will be open tomorrow. It may take a few more days for some of the places that were harder hit. Now, as you survey damage and clean up, please be cautious of hazards. We have post-storm fatalities almost every storm, and a lot of these fatalities are avoidable. So please be cautious of downed power lines. Don't touch them. Don't remove tree debris that may be entangled with downed power lines. Standing water can conceal downed power lines and other hazards, so please be mindful and never walk through storm waters. Standing storm waters can also carry a bacteria that can lead to fatal infections. This type of infection was responsible for a fatality following Hurricane Helene, so please avoid wading through standing water. Please use proper ladder safety. Please use proper generator safety. Do not operate the generator inside your home. It must be outside, a safe distance from doors and windows. Visit Florida's emergency accommodation modules on Expedia and Priceline will remain available for those who are returning to their homes which were evacuated during the storm and sustained damage or in need of other type of shelter. So these models will continue to provide real-time hotel availability and lodging resources, making the experience easier for users. If traffic lights are out in your area, please drive with caution and treat each light as you would a four-way stop. And also remember, if you're going to use a chainsaw, be very careful with that. We have mishaps on that after every storm. We are extending the Hope Florida line for another 2 weeks at 24 hours, 7 days a week. So if you need assistance or resources post-storm, you can call 1-833-GET-HOPE, 1-833-GET-HOPE. Hope Florida's disaster arm, Activate Hope, is a program designed to help people find help following a disaster such as a hurricane. So you can call the Hope line. You can also visit the Hope bus, which will be in some of these areas very soon, and there'll be announcements about that. Florida Commerce and the State Emergency Response Team activated the Business Damage Assessment Survey in response to Hurricane Milton. Business owners can self-report physical and economic damage caused by the storm. Businesses can complete the survey online at floridadisaster.biz, floridadisaster.biz. Florida Commerce has also activated the Small Business Emergency Bridge Loan Program. We have $50 million available to Florida small businesses, and it's a zero-interest loan, very flexible repayment options. You can apply for loans of up to $50,000 through the program. Loans of up to $100,000 are available for agriculture and aquaculture small businesses, and loans of $150,000 are available for citrus and cattle operations. Again, these are short-term zero-interest loan. You get the cash in your hand. The repayment terms are very flexible. You can apply at www.floridajobs.org/EBL, floridajobs.org/EBL. We've also activated the Florida Disaster Fund for those who want to make tax-deductible charitable contributions that will be used to be able to help Floridians who are in need. And you can go to floridadisasterfund.org, floridadisasterfund.org, if you have any questions. We're going to continue to support all remaining rescue missions that are underway and that may be needed in the near future. We'll also continue to assess the damage that was done from the storm. We also anticipate that because of the amount of water, you may see flooding happen not just now, but in the subsequent days. But I think everybody responded very quickly. I'm proud of everybody's hard work. We got more work to do, but we will absolutely get through this. Okay, Kevin Guthrie.
Good morning, everyone. Governor, thank you for your leadership time and time again. I know you and the State Emergency Response Team will lead.
Well, as we were just hearing there from Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida, he did say, thankfully, not the worst case scenario. It could have been much worse, but that 80,000 people remain in shelters, hundreds of rescue operations, around 125 operations continuing, and some 6,500 soldiers deployed across the state. He continued to say that some areas have up to 75% power outages, 3 million homes remaining without power. And he also issued a warning of fatalities in the storm's aftermath, with, of course, that following the 200 deaths in the most previous hurricane just 2 weeks ago. We're now hearing from a member of the police department there in Florida. We will keep across the lines coming into us in the newsroom as the story develops. But as I say, the hurricane is now moving away, but people still being told to stay safe. Returning now to news here at home, and nearly 400 people have already been jailed following this summer's violent disorder. New data reveals that 388 people have been sentenced to immediate custody, nearly half of all of those who've appeared in court. In total, over 800 people have faced initial hearings, with almost 500 cases completed and just over 320 continuing. The Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, says the mindless minority involved have felt the full force of the law, with more facing prison. Authorities are praising the swift action taken to keep communities safe. And police have also identified 24 suspects in their investigation into the deaths of hundreds of patients at Gosport War Memorial Hospital in Hampshire. In 2018, a report found over 450 lives were lost because of the use of opioids at the hospital. Until 2000, another 200 patients were affected but not killed. Operation Magenta, led by the Kent and Essex Serious Crime Division, has now reviewed the records of 750 patients and taken 1,200 witness statements. Well, of the suspects, 21 are currently being interviewed for alleged gross negligence manslaughter. The remaining 3 facing charges under the Health and Safety at Work Act. And finally, we've also heard figures out from the NHS this morning showing that hospital waiting lists in England have hit a 10-month high, with more than 3,300 patients waiting over 18 months for routine treatment. In A&E, nearly 39,000 people waited more than 12 hours in September before being admitted, a jump from August's figures. For emergencies like heart attacks and strokes, ambulances took an average of 36 minutes. That's nearly double the 18-minute target. And patients in urgent but less critical conditions waited over 2 hours, an increase from last month. Those are the latest headlines for now. I'll be back with you just after 2 o'clock. Next, though, we'll take a quick look at the markets.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Well, here's a quick look at the markets as they stand this afternoon. The pound will buy you $1.3061 and €1.1947. The price of gold, £2,002 rather, and 52 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is at 8,245 points.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
OK, it's 1:45. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain. Now, Suella Braverman, the former Home Secretary, she's been forced to cancel a speech today after a pro-Palestine group threatened to protest the event.
Well, the former Home Secretary was due to speak at Cambridge University, but had to call off the event after being advised that her safety could no longer be guaranteed.
Well, she posted on social media saying intimidation and thuggery have no place on campus or in our democracy.
Well, delighted to be joined now by Associate Professor at Cambridge University, Dr. James Orr. James, thank you so much for joining us. Can you just tell us basically what's happened today?
Well, it's a pretty fast-moving stream of events. As far as I know, the former Home Secretary had been invited to speak at the Cambridge University Conservative Association this evening, as I understand it. That had been in the schedule for a while. It had been presumably widely advertised. And over the last 48 hours or so, a pro-Palestine group within the university had made public comments making it clear that they would be turning up in a show of force and aggression at the event, and intimidating people who would want to attend it. Now, you know, it's a difficult line to draw between legitimate protests, which nobody wants to curtail or undermine, and the kind of aggressive expressions of criticism that can intimidate people who would want to come and hear someone like the former Home Secretary. So it's a pretty grim situation, and it's a stark reminder, yet another stark reminder, of just how foolish it is of the present government to have blocked the Freedom of Speech Higher Education Act 2023, which was passed a year ago and was due to come into effect on the 1st of August, and would have targeted exactly this sort of behaviour.
I should say, James, that we have tried to get in touch with this Palestine group at Cambridge, and they don't want to speak. I think there's a bit of an irony there. They don't want Suella Braverman to speak, and they don't want to speak either, presumably because they don't wish to be challenged. Now, what do you think of the principle, though, here? Should students be allowed to decide who gets to speak on campus? So, I don't know, if a student union takes a vote and decides that they don't want a controversial speaker to come, even a former Home Secretary, should they be allowed to do so?
No, they shouldn't be allowed to do so, and the law, in fact, prevents them from doing so. There's been a law on the books since 1986, the 1986 Education Act No. 2, that puts specific statutory obligations on universities to allow visiting, to ensure the academic freedom and freedom of speech of all visiting speakers and members of staff and students. So any student union that attempted to do that would be in breach. Now, there's nothing to stop them protesting the views of a visiting speaker. That's absolutely fine. But when it borders into the kind of aggression that led these students who had invited Suella Braverman to take the view that they simply couldn't provide the security for people attending and for Braverman, then you've clearly got an instance where an example of freedom of speech being constrained, and the mob effectively exercising a heckler's veto. Now, that, as I said, the existing the 86 Act prevents that, and this new legislation would not only have prevented it, but would have provided a mechanism for the student hosts to appeal directly to the Office for Students and force the institutions, Corpus Christi College or the University of Cambridge, to take active steps to promote freedom of speech. Now, I should just be clear that it's not obvious that either the college in question or the university is at fault yet. These things move very, very fast. As far as I know, the university authorities are not aware of this or have not been made aware of it until it went public this morning. But as I said, it underlines the need for effective legislation to prevent this, and the folly of the government deciding that the legislation wasn't needed.
Well, let's hope that some solution can be found. So often in these cases, of course, it's not that we're trying to ban you, it's just that we can't guarantee your safety. It's the weasel words of those who try and cancel by other means. But James Orr, thank you so much for joining us and talking us through this developing situation today.
Yeah, I mean, Suella Braverman went to Cambridge herself.
Yeah.
Surely she should be allowed to do a speech.
She was chairman of the organisation that has now invited her back, the Cambridge University Conservative Association.
Right, OK, we've got lots more coming up on today's show. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back in a tick. Stay with us.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
The London premiere of the first Bond film, Dr. No, was 61 years ago.
Wow.
Today, which is just quite something. Let's talk to AJ Chowdhury, who's a Bond movie expert. Actually, I mean, obviously there's been the evolution in the films, but there's still that longevity there. They've tweaked, they've changed, but we still have a passion for it.
Absolutely. James Bond is a British cultural heirloom.
from the Ian Fleming novels and the literary heritage to the movies still being produced by the family, the Broccoli family, Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson. They're fantastic. They're global brand leaders, but also, at the end of the day, they employ lots of people in the film industry. They've kept the institutions in Britain alive and around the world. It's the best filmmakers around the world. Great actors, great stars, but constant renewal and giving us something different, yet something traditional.
I really like this sort of gritty Daniel Craig stuff.
Whereas I don't.
No, you're not a fan. But the genre has changed from something that was slightly comedic, really, quite light and fun, to something a bit heavier. Is that a bad thing or a good thing?
You know, there's renewal. Like, I'm sure people... I grew up with Timothy Dalton. He's my favourite Bond. George Lazenby, the one-off, is in the most critically acclaimed Bond film. And Daniel Craig has made the brand so commercially and critically acclaimed. So we're now all waiting on bated breath for the next James Bond.
Who do you think it could be? Who's your money on?
Nobody knows at the moment.
But Sean Connery came back, didn't he, and made a Bond movie that wasn't officially sanctioned. It's all very bizarre.
Sean Connery came back a couple of times. He left after You Only Live Twice, then came back again, of course, with enough money. He comes back. And there's a complex legal situation. Sean Connery had a kind of love-hate relationship with James Bond. Unfortunately, that's how he's remembered.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 53 minutes past 1. A lot of you are getting in touch about this Suella Braverman story. John says, wasn't it Cambridge University that allowed pro-Palestine students to demonstrate on their hallowed grass?
Yes. Patrick Christie's went around with Suella, or was that Oxford?
That was Cambridge.
It was Cambridge. Well, there you go. Bren says the university needs to kick these students off their courses. This rubbish has to stop, and stop now. We can't have self-entitled brats telling the country what it can and can't do. Well, there you go, strong stuff.
Yeah, Sharon says arrest the group for threatening Braverman. Come on, Starmer.
Well, we're going to have to take a quick break, actually, but we'll be back with some more stories. Apparently, Spain is threatening a hard border with Gibraltar. We'll bring you the latest next.
Yes. And, of course, we're going to bring you the latest update on the weather as well, but much more to come in the next hour, so don't go anywhere.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome to your GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Well, to end the week, we've got sunny spells and showers, brisk winds, particularly in the north, and it is going to be feeling cold. And the reason for this is that we're dragging in some cold air from the Arctic, and that's spreading across the country, bringing that cold feel to end the week and into the weekend. So as soon as the sun goes down this evening and that cloud clears across England and Wales, it is going to be feeling chilly. Clear skies, light winds, so likely to see a lot of frost in rural spots and perhaps even some mist and fog by the morning. A different story across Scotland, far more cloud and some showers feeding through, particularly around coastal areas, but some also feeding in inland. And amongst those showers, this could fall as sleet and snow, particularly over hilly areas. Those blustery winds are also going to continue through into Friday morning, so quite a chilly start, plenty of showers and plenty of cloud around, and a few of those showers starting to feed in to western and northern coasts of Northern Ireland. Perhaps a few in northwestern coasts too, but elsewhere a largely dry and bright start. but it is going to be feeling cold and quite frosty and crisp to start the end of the week. Plenty of bright spells across the country too, but it is still going to be feeling cold. Lighter winds though, so not quite as cold as it was feeling this afternoon. Once again, still plenty of blustery showers across Scotland, so quite a damp day on offer here, but elsewhere plenty of dry and bright sunny spells. As I say, temperatures are still below average, so still cold, but not as cold as this afternoon in those lighter winds, but in those blustery winds in western parts of Scotland, that's really going to take the edge off of those temperatures. Into the evening, more of the same, still plenty of showers moving through across Scotland, Northern Ireland, but elsewhere plenty of clear skies. So another cold night ahead and some cold starts as we head into the weekend. Otherwise, that's it from me. Bye for now.
We can expect clear skies, leading to a light and warm day ahead. Lovely. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You really could. Luck.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe. Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's now 2 o'clock on Thursday, the 10th of October. I'm Tom Harwood.
You just had to check the day, didn't you? I'm Emily Carver.
Well, the sun rises over the trail of devastation as Hurricane Milton continues to batter Florida. Right now, there are more than 3 million people without power after the monster storm tore through the Sunshine State. Still unclear how many people have died, but we know hundreds of homes have been destroyed.
And Red Tape Britain. Angela Rayner, she's head up north to sell her super-duper new workers' rights package. But while some employees may be happy, small business owners are slamming the government's rush job as clumsy, chaotic, poorly planned, and also threatening employment and growth.
Police chair suspended. Yes, the head of the Metropolitan Police Federation is under investigation after telling GB News about officers' fears about being accused of racism.
And is Gibraltar now under threat? Spain warns it could station troops in the British territory and introduce a hard border unless the UK agrees to a generous post-Brexit deal. Well, there's a huge amount to get to. This story about Gibraltar, slightly worrying.
Yes, very worrying. Well, of course, there are these negotiations now happening. The government says they don't want to compromise the sovereignty of Gibraltar in any way. If only they had been so clear on the Chagos Islands. But the Spanish want to station Spanish troops on the Rock of Gibraltar. Curious.
Will we allow it?
Well, we don't know yet. The negotiations are ongoing.
And what's this got to do with Brexit?
Well, there are many different arguments about how much access the Gibraltarians should have to Spain and trade and goods and people in the border and all the rest of it. So that's part of the negotiation. But, of course, there's no give without take. And the Spanish latest sort of ask is to put Spanish soldiers on the Rock of Gibraltar.
But is this part of what people were warning? You know, Chagos Islands, ceding sovereignty of those. Will there be other claims to British territory? And so on. We then cede more.
We know there have been
cede
claims.
More.
The Argentines of wanting the Falkland Islands, although at Prime Minister's questions, Keir Starmer made clear that he didn't want to give them up. And he made the same statement over Gibraltar. Now, I suppose we can take him at his word, but there are currently negotiations ongoing, of course, to do with access and trade and visas and movement across that border. But there are some real big questions about what sort of guarantees will be given.
I guess the question is, how seriously should we take these threats from Spain? We'll speak to an expert a little bit later in the show. Get your thoughts in, gbnews.com/your say. But let's get to the headlines with Sam Francis.
Very good afternoon to you. It is 3 minutes past 2. I've been told I have exactly 5 minutes to rattle through the headlines, so here we go. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis says that Hurricane Milton's impact was significant, but thankfully not the worst-case scenario. Giving an update on the storm's aftermath, Ron DeSantis said that hundreds of rescue operations are continuing across the state, with more than 6,000 soldiers deployed, 3 million homes still without power, and over 80,000 people seeking shelter. He also warned residents about possible post-storm dangers, urging them to avoid standing water, which can conceal bacteria that he said may cause infections. Well, water levels are still expected to rise despite the storm now clearing, with major flooding anticipated in several rivers across the state. Those latest updates from Ron DeSantis, Florida governor, follow President Biden's calling of the hurricane being one of the most destructive in a century, while slamming what he called Donald Trump's reckless claims about the government's response. Here's what Donald Trump had to say about Biden's handling of the disaster so far.
This administration has not done a proper job at all. Terrible, terrible. Nobody's seen anything like it. But we just pray for everybody. We want them all to be good, and we're going to be there hopefully soon, and we're going to help them rebuild and get it all back together. And we hope that God will keep them safe. God will keep them safe.
Here, police have identified 24 suspects in their investigation into the deaths of hundreds of patients at Gosport War Memorial Hospital in Hampshire. In 2018, a report found over 450 lives were lost because of the use of opioids at the hospital until 2000, with another 200 patients affected but not killed. Operation Magenta, led by the Kent and Essex Serious Crime Division, has now reviewed the records of 750 patients and taken 1,200 witness statements. Of those 24 suspects, 21 are currently being interviewed. That's for alleged gross negligence manslaughter. 3 of the other 24 are facing charges under the Health and Safety at Work Act. NHS figures out this morning show hospital waiting lists in England have hit a 10-month high, with more than 3,300 patients waiting over 18 months for routine treatment. In A&E, nearly 39,000 people waited more than 12 hours in September before being admitted. That's a jump from August's figures. And for emergencies like heart attacks and strokes, ambulances took an average of 36 minutes. That's nearly double the 18-minute target. Millions of workers could gain new rights under the government's Employment Rights Bill, which promises the biggest overhaul of workers' protections in a generation. The bill would end zero-hours contracts, so-called fire and rehire practices, and extend parental leave and sick pay from day one of employment. The Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, says the changes will give workers more security, but some businesses are concerned about the practical impacts. Meanwhile, unions have welcomed the move, but could affect up to 9 million people by 2026. And ministers say more details are still to be decided after further consultation. James Cleverly's elimination from the Conservative leadership race has shocked some in the party after he failed last night to gain enough votes. The ballot left many baffled within the party, and some MPs believed Cleverly was a sure win and had switched their votes, but others point to a stronger campaign from his rivals. Now the final two are Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick, starting their campaigns ahead of the final vote, both of them seen as representing the right of the party. Badenoch's backers see her as a rising star, while Jenrick is pushing hard as the underdog. Conservative members will now choose the next leader, with the winner set to be announced on the 2nd of November. Rachel Reeves may need to raise up to £25 billion from tax increases to keep the public spending rising, according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Even with Labour's planned £9 billion of tax rises, the IFS is still warning that to avoid cuts, the Chancellor will need to raise another £16 billion. Rachel Reeves has promised to avoid raising income tax, national insurance, VAT or corporation tax, but that limits her options for closing the gap. Experts say her first budget on the 30th of October could be the most consequential since 2010. Police must and can do better. That's according to a new report on antisocial behaviour. The police watchdog's calling for more neighbourhood officers, with many forces across England and Wales failing to respond consistently to incidents. Around 1 million antisocial behaviour cases were reported last year, with Inspector of Constabulary Lee Freeman stressing the need for early intervention and for better training for officers. The government has pledged to restore law and order on the streets, with plans for new respect orders to target offenders. The report by the police watchdog made 8 recommendations urging police to regain the public's confidence. UK pharmaceutical giant GSK will pay almost £1.7 billion to settle claims that a discontinued version of its heartburn drug, Zantac, caused cancer. The settlements cover around 90% of all cases filed by around 80,000 claimants in the US. Zantac was pulled from the shelves in 2020 after regulators linked ingredients to potential cancer risks. And finally, some breaking news for you from the sporting world. Gareth Southgate has just bid farewell to coaching entirely, well, at least for the next year, and says he's unlikely to take over a different national team. That's after the former England manager stepped down in July, announcing he won't be returning to coaching anytime soon. England is, of course, searching for its successor, with Lee Carsley as the interim manager, while Southgate hinted that a return to club football would have depended on the right opportunity. But speaking today, Southgate said he still needs time to recharge.
Enjoying my life, so there's no rush. I was 11 years, committed myself fully to the National Federation, and I've got lots of different experiences. I won't coach in the next year for sure. I'm certain of that. I need to give myself time to make good decisions.
A potential farewell from Gareth Southgate there. We'll see if he returns to any clubs in the future. Those are the latest headlines for now. Over my 5-minute timeline, so I will hand you straight back very quickly to Tom and Emily.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
I didn't have my stopwatch out, but that was definitely 7 to 8 minutes. A lovely report, though.
I think it was worth every second. Well, it's 10 minutes past 2 now, and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis says hundreds of rescue operations are continuing in the state, with more than 6,000 soldiers now deployed in the wake of Hurricane Milton.
Wow, 3 million homes are still without power. Over 80,000 people are now seeking shelter.
But Governor DeSantis says the impact of the storm was significant, but thankfully not the worst-case scenario.
OK, well, joining us now is meteorologist and weather forecaster at the Met Office, Aidan McGivern. Aidan, there was talk that this storm would be the worst in a century. Was it?
I think it's a bit too early to tell. The Americans are just waking up now and assessing the damage, so we'll see what the damage overall has been, and we'll be able to tell in a few days, few weeks, how significant it has been historically. It has been very damaging. We had destructive winds, Category 3 hurricane as it hit Florida at 1:30 UK time this morning. and those wind speeds were 120 miles an hour as it made landfall. And we also saw extensive flash flooding from the very heavy rainfall. We saw a significant storm surge. The storm surge wasn't quite as significant as feared, and that's to do with timings. So luckily, in some ways, the hurricane arrived earlier and it went through quicker, and that led to a smaller storm surge. So storm surges are all about timings, and if all the right or wrong things come together, then you get a very, very significant storm surge indeed. So just because of a slight difference in timings, then thankfully the worst case scenarios as far as storm surge were concerned didn't come to pass.
So those worst-case scenarios were suggesting around 15 feet of depth to the water that came in the storm surge. Do we know how high it actually got?
I believe it got to 2.5 meters, so what's that, 7 to 8 feet, something like that, around the west coast, around Tampa, down to Fort Myers, and that wasn't as high as 15 feet. It wasn't as high as the Hurricane Helene, as that hit the Big Bend area of Florida less than a month ago. Then we saw 15 feet of storm surge, and we saw what devastating impacts that can cause. So, yeah, very lucky to have escaped that worst-case scenario.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed for bringing us the latest. Aidan McGivern, meteorologist and weather forecaster at the Met Office. Thank you very much indeed.
It's great to see Aidan with the green screen behind him, but nothing on the green screen. We're breaking the fourth wall here of television magic.
That's true, actually, yes. Seeing a bit too much behind the screen, yes.
Well, but in other news, Spain is reportedly threatening to bring in a hard border at Gibraltar, which could see Spanish troops stationed there, unless the UK accepts what they're terming a generous post-Brexit deal.
OK, well, Spain's foreign minister told the Spanish media that the EU's new digital border system will affect thousands on both sides of the border.
This all comes as the government announced last week it planned to hand over the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. So could the UK give up on Gibraltar next?
Well, we're joined by former advisor to the Ministry of Defence, NATO and UN advisor, Gwythian Prince. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Can you make sense of this? What exactly are Spain threatening?
Oh, Emily, it's straightforward blackmail. What they're saying is we'll make life extremely difficult for everybody who lives on the rock, who's British. It's not the first time that we've been here. But look, we're getting very close to fundamental challenge to who we in this country actually think we really are. And let me explain why Gibraltar takes us there. Many people hadn't heard of the Chagos Islands, which were given up on completely spurious grounds of so-called international law. We can come back to what the difference is between customary and modern international law if you want later. But Gibraltar is different. Now, it wasn't much in the news, but exactly a week ago, last Tuesday, His Majesty's Royal Marines marched in full uniform, full battle honours, from the casemate right the way down through Gibraltar to celebrate the 360th anniversary of the Corps. But why did they do this? They did this because in 1704, under Admiral Sir George Rooke, it was the Royal Marines who captured Gibraltar in the War of the Spanish Succession, and it's the sole battle honour on the colours of His Majesty's Royal Marines, for God's sake. And so, you know, these people are very close to the heart of what many viewers, I guess, would see as the essence of British identity. And in terms of customary international law, Emily, if you look, and I just did before this interview, at the Treaty of Utrecht from 1713, Article 10 says that the Spanish crown ceded the town of Gibraltar in perpetuity to the British. In perpetuity means forever in my dictionary. And that was reaffirmed in 1729 and in 1783. And then in 2000, there was a referendum about joint sovereignty because the Spanish don't give up. And the people of Gibraltar rejected that. It goes on and on and on. And suddenly we have a government in Britain that's as weak as water, that clearly has no concept of what our national interests really are. And I'm saying all of this aside from the fundamental strategic importance of places like the Diego Garcia base, which is absolutely central in the emerging Third World War, in which, for better or worse, we are all now engaged. And Gibraltar is another of these places. So for us to even allow this sort of thing to be discussed is a sign of absolutely criminal weakness. And I don't think the people of Britain will be very much impressed.
Now, of course, Spain holds its own two enclaves, exclaves, whatever you want to call them, in North Africa. It seems fairly bonkers that they would actually go for a grab of sovereignty over Gibraltar and yet cling on to these two little parts of Africa that they hold. I mean, that would be fairly inconsistent.
No, Tom, it's not bonkers, with respect. It's not bonkers. It's completely logical. And we have been here before. We're living in one of these horror films, which you may have seen some of them, where the film starts and then it finishes back where it began. We're back with Mrs. May and her Brexit exit agreement that wasn't a Brexit exit agreement, that was organised by Mr. Ollie Robbins, who we are now told is going to be our new cabinet secretary. So all of those people who lost the referendum and who never accepted the result, by the way, they've used Northern Ireland.
But Gwithian, if I could just jump in here, is there not an argument? I mean, one of the reasons why the Gibraltarian politicians were in London recently asking the UK government to open these negotiations with the Spanish because they're worried about this new digital system that comes in, I think it's 2027 or 2028. Everyone's going to need to be fingerprinted every time they cross over to the EU border. All of these things that will massively damage Gibraltarian trade and travel and all the rest of it. I mean, couldn't you argue that one of the UK and therefore Gibraltar having left the European Union is one of the reasons why these negotiations are now beginning?
Well, you can make that argument, but on the other hand, if you look back to the epic vote of the 17.4 million, you'll know that Gibraltarians were extremely strong in wanting to leave the EU, and they were very wise to do so, because as we sit here today, we're looking at
I think Gibraltar voted Remain, actually.
Are you right? Oh, yes. I'm sorry. You are right. I'm sorry. I correct myself. They voted to remain, but the fundamental commitment it's a split loyalty. The fundamental commitment in the referendum to their strategic interest is to remain aligned with their British identity, just like the Chagossians, just like the people in the Falkland Islands. And so what's being used here is a really rather sort of cruel attempt to weaponize these joint interests. And frankly, a British government shouldn't even allow that to begin.
Fascinating. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us this afternoon, Gwithian Prince. Very interesting indeed. You put your point across very strongly. Former advisor to the Ministry of Defence, NATO and UN. What do you make of that?
I think there's
blackmail.
I mean, clearly the Spanish have blackmailed the Gibraltarians, and therefore the British, time and time again, they tighten up the border controls whenever they want to sort of squeeze that vice, and then they loosen them, and then they tighten them. But this is sort of the next stage of that. I mean, it really could get pretty hairy, which is one of the reasons why the UK government is now negotiating. But the question is, what is the UK going to give over to the Spanish? And might it encroach upon those ideas of sovereignty?
Well, Gwithian seems to think that the current government has no understanding of what our national interest is. Strong stuff. So we shall see what happens. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Lots more coming up. Why has the Met Police Federation suspended its chair? This follows an interview Charlie Peters conducted with the chair. What's going on there? That's next.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're joined by Lewis Oakley and Esther Stanhope. And Lewis, let's start with free gear Keir, shall we? It's been the story of the week, and apparently it's led to, well, calamity in the polls.
Yeah, so he has dropped by 26 points in the opinion polls. And, I mean, it's just been sort of going down from day one. He didn't even start that high. But, yeah, this is just bad optics. As we say, like, he hasn't done anything illegal or wrong. Everything was declared, but at the same time, you're telling people they don't get their winter fuel allowance, and you're there walking off with your swag bag. It's just not a good look. And even, you know, I was thinking as well the optics of them trying to clamp down on MPs having second jobs. You know, any of those could turn around and say, well, actually, we have to pay for our own clothes. I just think it's just bad optics that he's had. And, you know, we've got those comparisons of Sunak in the stands. He's just sat amongst the people. And
Prince William goes to Villa games, albeit in the director's box, but it's not an 8k per game seat. And by the way, can I just mention, this isn't just an isolated Labour incident. Since the start of their tenure, they were accused of filling the civil service with previous Labour donors, previous Labour aides, people who worked for Labour Together think tank. The civil service is meant to be politically neutral, and they bypassed a lot of procedures to get people into their positions, not least the Chancellor Rachel Reeves, who parachuted Ian Caulfield, his name was, who donated £5,000 personally to her, and then he ended up in the Treasury with a 175k a year job. Yes, he did resign after it was revealed in the Times, but it does make you wonder, you know, you've spent years having a go at the Tories for this, and you do exactly the same thing.
Yeah, it's full of hypocrisy, and also the whole Sue Gray thing, and they were slagging off the Conservatives for not towing the line, and now they're being hypocrites because now they're taking freebies.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel. If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 24 minutes past 2. Now, the Metropolitan Police Federation, or rather, Feast Federation.
No, Fleece.
Goodness me. Police Federation chairman has been suspended after telling GB News that white officers were hesitating when dealing with ethnic minority Londoners.
Yes, Rick Pryor, he said that malicious racism investigations were causing officers to think twice before doing their jobs. Now, GB News understands that he was suspended for these comments, described as discriminatory by the Federation.
Well, let's speak with the man who conducted the interview that led to this suspension. Charlie Peters is with us, our national reporter. Charlie, this is a fairly extraordinary story.
Right, and the many reactions that I've heard in the last day, and indeed since he was suspended yesterday evening, have been predominantly from police officers who've said that Rick Pryor has been suspended and is under investigation for telling the truth. Rick Pryor, as the Metropolitan Police Federation's chairman, is responsible for representing the views of the 30,000 officers from constable to chief inspector. So lots of the junior ranks and some of those more senior, to represent them in the public, but also to represent them to the Met's senior leadership. And Rick, they say, has put forward controversial views, and one police officer told me that those views are out of line. That's Andy George from the National Black Police Association. He thinks they are discriminatory, but other officers are saying that they accurately represent what they're experiencing. And he's made this intervention after 2 recent high-profile cases where the Independent Office for Police Conduct has conducted investigations into officers accused of racism and for acting in an unacceptable manner. Both of those investigations have been overturned. In one case, the Police Appeals Tribunal said the decision of the original investigation was irrational. In a case that we spoke about on the phone on Monday, Rick and I, a police officer was convicted of assault for arresting a woman after she refused to show her bus fare. This was a fare evasion operation which was supporting TfL's revenue protection teams. Now, when I spoke to Rick about that case, he told me that the Met was involved in the racism of low expectations because they fail to criticise poor behaviour when ethnic minority Londoners get involved in these altercations with police officers. That was his accusation, and I spoke to him earlier this week, and here's what he had to say about that on air.
And the behaviour of certain individuals, it clearly falls below that of which society expects. I think it's incumbent on police leaders to support their officers who are charged with dealing with these type of incidents to come out and call out that behaviour. And I mean, the example of which I relate this to was the recent Croydon bus incident matter, where it was clear that the lady in question behaved poorly. It's a quite reasonable expectation of society that if you travel on transport, London transport, on the buses, the trains, you know that if you are asked to produce a valid ticket for travel, you show that ticket. Had that happened in this case, there would have been no incident. And so it was the behaviour of the lady in question that instigated the whole matter.
Now, Rick Pryor also told me that officers were hesitating before getting involved with ethnic minority Londoners for fear of malicious and vexatious investigations being opened onto them, and that has led to this suspension last night from the Met's Foundation. Investigation by the Police Federation of England and Wales, which is the national body which represents some 130,000 officers across those countries. So it's a big moment, and lots of officers are angry about this move.
Is it likely that anyone in a senior position will come out publicly in his defence?
Well, I contacted the Met about this situation on Monday when I had the interview. They didn't want to pass comment, but we are seeing lots of retired officers speaking publicly about the senior retired officers, and also other Federation chairs. Richard Cook, who's the chair of the West Midlands Police Federation, he told me last night that he was shocked and saddened by this move. PC Lee Broadbent, who was formerly chair of another region, Greater Manchester's Federation, he said it was a perverse decision. And also, funnily enough, I heard from a former criminal this morning who also thought that it was an extraordinary situation. He said that Rick Pryor was telling the truth. He told me that he met up recently with a still active gang member who told him that he makes sure that when he's distributing drugs, he uses black teenage boys to do it because he thinks they're less likely to be stopped because the police don't want those vexatious racism investigations.
That's an extraordinary claim, Charlie. But I do want to ask, it seems as though perhaps some people want to make an example out of Rick Pryor because he spoke to the media, because he gave you that interview, because we showed it here on GB News. Do you think there's a sort of censorious, even if he's reinstated, he's been firmly wrapped on the knuckles, and perhaps more than that, more people in senior positions throughout the Police Federation and everything else will be more wary about speaking to journalists?
Tom, there's no doubt in my mind that this suspension and investigation will have a chilling effect on the confidence that police officers feel that they can express their concerns to their federation chairs. The Met is the largest force in England and Wales. It's the largest federation as well. If they can go after Rick Pryor and suspend him and investigate him for being supposedly discriminatory, for telling what he says is the views and the fears of those he's there to represent, then smaller organisations within that professional federation, that police federation, will undoubtedly feel the concern that they can't raise those concerns as well. It starts here, but it might lead lesser concerns, less controversial issues to remain hidden, and police officers not to get the representation that they need.
Yeah, people do need to feel free to be able to voice concerns and voice their experiences. Otherwise, people will just censor themselves constantly. Yeah. Thank you very much indeed, Charlie, for bringing us that story. Charlie Peters, our national reporter, of course.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Much more coming up in today's programme, including we're going to catch up again with Will Hollis with this story, this extraordinary story of a bank in Nottingham, of all places, removing Robin Hood from its own logo, because Robin Hood is too what was the word?
He's not inclusive enough.
Not inclusive enough. Bizarre.
I thought he was quite woke, Robin Hood.
Very good afternoon to you. It is exactly 31 minutes past 2. The top story from the newsroom this hour. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis says Hurricane Milton's impact was significant, but he said thankfully not the worst case scenario. Giving an update on the storm's aftermath earlier this afternoon, Ron DeSantis said hundreds of rescue operations are continuing, with more than 6,000 soldiers deployed across the state. 3 million homes are still without power, and over 80,000 people seeking shelter. At this stage, reports suggest 4 people have been confirmed dead. We haven't yet verified that exact figure here in the GB newsroom, but we will be keeping across the numbers for you throughout this afternoon. DeSantis also warned residents about post-storm dangers, urging them to avoid standing water, which he said can conceal bacteria that may cause infections. Water levels are still expected to rise despite the storm now clearing, with major flooding anticipated in several rivers across the state. Nearly 400 people here have already been jailed following this summer's violent disorder. New data out today reveals that 388 people have been sentenced to immediate custody. Nearly half of all of those have appeared in court. In total, over 800 people have faced initial hearings, with almost 500 cases now completed and more than 320 still ongoing. Justice Secretary Shabana Mahmood says the mindless minority involved have felt the full force of the law, with more facing prison. Authorities are praising the swift action taken to keep communities safe. Police have identified 24 suspects in their investigation into the deaths of hundreds of patients at Gosport War Memorial Hospital in Hampshire. In 2018, a report found over 450 lives were lost because of the use of opioids at the hospital. That was until 2000. Operation Magenta, led by Kent and Essex Serious Crime Division, has now reviewed the records of 750 patients and taken 1,200 witnesses' statements. Of the suspects, 21 currently being interviewed for alleged gross negligence manslaughter. The 3 remaining of the 24 suspects are facing charges under the Health and Safety at Work Act. And NHS figures out today have shown that hospital waiting lists in England have hit a 10-month high. More than 3,300 patients were waiting over 18 months for routine treatment. In A&E, nearly 39,000 people waited more than 12 hours in September before being admitted. That was a jump from August's figures. And for emergencies like heart attacks and strokes, ambulances took an average of 36 minutes. That's nearly double the 18-minute target. Patients in urgent but less critical conditions waited over 2 hours, another increase from last month. Those are the latest headlines for now. Sophia Wensler will have your next update at 3 o'clock. Now, though, it's over to Tom and Emily.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello, good morning and welcome to your GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Well, a fair amount of cloud in the south as some light rain clears, but there are plenty of bright spells today with a risk of showers, but it is going to be feeling much colder than of late. And the reason for this is that we're bringing in our air from the Atlantic, which is feeding in across the UK. And notice the squeeze in the isobars, so we've got plenty of brisk winds across the country. That cloud will stick around the south through much of the day with some outbreaks of light rain possible, but some bright spells elsewhere, still with a risk of showers. Plenty of showers, in fact, feeding into coasts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. And these could turn a little bit wintry across the Scottish Highlands too. And there will still be those blustery winds, particularly across any coasts and in any exposed areas too. So it is really going to be feeling rather chilly, particularly in that wind. As we head into this evening, still plenty of cloud across much of England and Wales, still with that risk of showers. But the main source of those showers is going to be moving in to coasts of Northern Ireland and Scotland. Still, once again, falling as sleet and snow even by this evening across Scotland. It's still fairly blustery under those showers too, so it will be feeling cold. Those showers are set to continue overnight across much of Scotland, Northern Ireland. Still a few around coasts, particularly those North Sea coasts. But across much of England and Wales, winds are going to be turning lighter and there'll be plenty of clear skies, so likely to see some mist and fog and plenty of grass frost by the time we reach tomorrow morning. So another cold start to end the week. Still feeling cold in those winds across Scotland, but a cloudier here and those showers feeding through too. On the whole, across much of England and Wales, after a cold start, there's going to be plenty of bright sunshine around. And with lighter winds too, it's not going to feel quite as cold, even though temperatures are fairly similar. But across Scotland still, we've got those showers merging into longer spells of rain, so a pretty damp day on offer here. So wrap up warm to enjoy the sunshine.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon to you. Hello, I'm Jules Buckley. Some delays towards Leeds, heading up the M621, a lane shut junction 5 up to 4 for emergency repairs. The exit slip at junction 4 is also closed in that direction too. Preston, the northbound A5072, that's West Strand. From the A59 Guildway to Waterloo Lane, there's a vehicle fire, so that's causing delays. A lane closure has been put in place. Now, the northbound M6 between Nuneaton and Coventry, junction 3, and the Corley services. Now, a queue there at the scene of a collision with a lane closed. And Crown East in Worcester, the A44. Now, that's currently closed both ways. It's shut between St Thomas Church and the Bransford turnoff. That's the A4103 turnoff there. There's been a collision, closed both ways and queuing. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 37 minutes past 2. Now, more than 7 million new workers will get new rights under government plans unveiled today.
Yes, employees will be able to get statutory sick pay, parental leave and protection from unfair dismissal from day one in the workplace. I also think there'll be a default for flexible working.
But while some workers and unions are welcoming these new impositions on business, the Federation of Small Businesses has described the legislation as a rust job, clumsy, chaotic and poorly planned.
Love how you frame it as an imposition on business, whereas others, the unions, would frame it as, workers' rights revolution that doesn't go far enough.
I suppose through one framing, it's workers will be able to do this.
Yeah.
From the other framing, it's businesses will have to do this for workers.
I just wonder that businesses won't necessarily take on people, give people a chance. Anyway, we're now joined by small business owner Simon Bridgeland, who probably knows a lot more about running a business than I do. And you own a soft play centre in Canterbury. Simon, are you worried about these changes or do you welcome them?
They are quite a concern. Previously, with the businesses, I had the play centre and a day nursery, and the number of staff that I employed had a relatively high turnover because probably a good 2/3 of the staff were either students or part-time workers. And the extra pressures that this new bill is going to apply to a small business such as mine, it means that the vetting of those employees is going to be that much more stringent. And I do worry that as a small business owner, it would put you in a position that you could be liable for action being taken against you.
So the vetting for you will be more stringent because it will be harder to let someone go who's underperforming or who isn't doing a job correctly, I suppose, is your argument that actually it's going to be harder for you to hire people because once they're there, they're much stickier.
That's correct, yes. You've got to really, really be careful to make sure that you make the right hire, of course, and when it's perhaps part-time workers, the process for hiring them isn't perhaps as rigorous if it would be someone that was full-time, and it just means the ability to hire staff on quick, short notice is going to be that much more difficult and costly.
And are regulations at the moment, as they stand, are they already making things difficult? I mean, when I speak to people who run small businesses, they do complain about red tape. I guess people have accepted the minimum wage and things like that, but are there other things that are already causing you a bit of pain?
Yeah, I mean, the costs, obviously, of employing staff, you've got pensions, you've got national insurance, and the rumour has it that there's talk of an increase in employer national insurance contributions increasing. So any further burdens is just going to make it, quite frankly, some businesses untenable.
Now, lots of people say that when it comes to employers' national insurance contributions, that's just a tax on businesses, that's not a tax on workers. But other people say, well, actually, that's going to come out of people's salaries. Which way do you view it?
Ultimately, it's going to come out of the pockets of the employers, and if the pockets of the employers aren't sufficiently full, then they just simply won't have a business. They won't be able to employ people.
Yeah, I do worry. Do you worry that Angela Rayner and Jonathan Reynolds, who's the business secretary, who are announcing all of this, do you worry about the fact that they don't have actually any experience in business themselves? Both of them haven't worked in a business, from what I can see from their CV.
Well, I think there's a lot of positions that are filled in government that you could say that. So it'd be wrong for me to comment. I think we all know our answers there.
OK, well, read between the lines, Simon. I won't make you say exactly what you think. Simon Bridgeland, you own a soft play centre in Canterbury. Well, good luck with all these changes that may be coming soon. Although some of them won't come in for another 2 years or something like this.
Yeah, there's the... what is it? We'll get to it. But coming up on today's show, much more. But before that, Martin Daubney is, of course, up at 3. Martin, what's on your programme?
Well, of course, as America wakes up to the storm of the century, we'll be live from the Sunshine State ahead of a £100 billion insurance bill. And I've got a political exclusive so hot. Chris Hopes told me if I tell you what it is, he's going to shoot me. And none of us would want that, even though it would make great box office. So we'll have to wait until 3 o'clock for that. But it's about the Tory leadership debacle. A new twist is coming our way. Plus, what are they smoking in my home city of Nottingham? First of all, they've got rid of Robin Hood. BBC made the Sheriff of Nottingham a queer, gender-fluid lesbian. And now, Nottingham City Council has banned bonfire night. It used to be on the Forest every year. I used to go to it every year, and guess why? Because they ran out of money because of Robin Hood Energy, a debacle. They launched a Corbyn-backed energy scheme, £38 million in the red, and as a consequence, there's no bonfire night. And of course, they can't hit climate change targets. Bonfire night has been cancelled. What next? Christmas, Easter? That's all coming on my show, 3 till 6.
Yeah, I mean, Martin, there have been a couple of people who have been pointing out that, who live in Nottingham, who are very angry that the bonfire night has been cancelled. Yet another thing cancelled, a tradition, just because of our incompetency of our councils, clearly.
If you can't protect the independence of a Protestant parliament, what can you do? Goodness me. Martin Daubney, thanks so much for joining us. We'll catch up with you.
Very good, Tom, very good. We've got lots more coming up on today's show. A train operator is coming under fire for prosecuting passengers who've mistakenly misused their rail cards. And you have to look very deep in the terms and conditions. This is a bit of a scandal, actually. We'll have that next.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
My kingdom for a voice. Scientists have, I can't believe this story, scientists have incredibly recreated the voice of Richard III using both his skull shape and a knowledge of medieval speech patterns. Me neither. The result is that the king, who was famously killed at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, would have spoken in English close to that of a man from modern-day Yorkshire or Somerset. Let's take a listen.
The sun shines with no less light and splendour, nor does it suffer any diminution of its strength.
Let's discuss this further with Yvonne Morley-Chisholm, the voice coach behind the project, who spent 10 years researching how the monarch would have sounded. Yvonne, you can probably see from my face, I have no idea how this works. Can you enlighten me as to what all this is about?
Yes, thank you very much indeed, Dawn. So yes, I had a mad idea 10 years ago. I normally work with actors where we have a recording of a historical person, and we do something called vocal profiling to train the actor who's going to be performing on stage or screen to move their tongue tip, their jaw, their lips, everything, and get behind the personality of who they're playing. We obviously have quite a lot of that missing from Richard. We don't have a recording of him, but I wondered how far we could go. And a key player in this has been and is Professor Caroline Wilkinson, who over a decade ago created his face, first of all, from his skull. Now, on the day we, as Shakespeare would say, shuffle off our mortal coil, every little dent and dimple in the bones says how fit and strong the muscles were. So I thought, OK, we know what his face could do.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment. This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory. Don't miss my big opinion. Mark Meets and my take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's now 14 minutes to 3. And the train operator Northern is coming under fire for prosecuting young people who've mistakenly used their rail cards at, get this, certain times that aren't allowed.
Yes, passengers have been prosecuted even and fined hundreds of pounds for using discounted anytime tickets before 10 o'clock.
Despite the tickets saying anytime, you can't use them at any time.
This is actually outrageous.
Well, the critics of Northern Rail say the terms and conditions of the rail cards simply aren't clear enough.
Well, we're joined now by senior reporter for Bolton News, Jack Fifield, sorry, I hope I pronounced that correctly, who's been reporting on this story and spoken to many young people affected. Jack, tell us, clearly this is happening to a lot of people.
Yeah, so it's really strange. I was looking through the court records for cases like this, and I happened to come across a woman in Bolton. She's in her 20s, and she had got a £1.60 discount on her morningly ticket to work. She was going from Daisy Hill in Bolton to Wigan to work for her £11.44 per hour job. And she got on the train and she was told that her ticket was invalid, despite it saying any time, valid any time of day. And she thought nothing of it, gave her details. And months later, she'd been fined £462, all for a £1.60 saving on her morningly train ticket.
This is extraordinary because so many people have these sorts of discount cards. You can go on the apps on which you buy your train tickets, select that you have a rail card, and some will show you that you can buy these and others will show you that you can't. And you have the ticket, you have your rail card, you think you're OK, but because you haven't read 16 pages of small print, you actually get a fine, and quite large fines here, as you're saying, sort of £500,000.
Yeah, what was crazy actually was this woman that I spoke to, Keris Piper. She actually had no idea that she had been found guilty at court. It was when I was speaking to her, she said, "Oh, they threatened to take me to court," and I was like, "Well, actually, they did take you to court, and this isn't just a fine. This is an actual criminal record that she now has that she had not even been aware of because she was found guilty at magistrates' court." And it's not just her. You know, I was looking. There was a man. I haven't managed to speak to him, so I won't say his name, but there was a 26-year-old man who had the exact same judgment against him. There was another man who had the same judgment against him. It all seems to end up at around £460 once Northern's costs are taken into account.
Jack,
and
how
the
do
court fees.
How do they get to the 400 odd pounds? I mean, for a discount of £1.60, how do they get there?
So it's quite mad, really. They tell you that because you got the discount of £1.60, your entire ticket was invalid. So first of all, they'll say you need to pay for the full ticket again. I think it was about a £5. So they'll have that as the compensation that they want. Then they'll seek £150 in costs that they incur in their private prosecution that they're bringing. So this is Northern bringing the prosecution themselves, similar to what we saw in the post office scandal. The Northern is actually bringing these prosecutions themselves. And then the court will impose a level 3 fine, which they're allowed to do according to the Regulations of Railways Act, which was drafted in 1889, which is about 85 years before rail cards were invented. And then they'll also add on a victim surcharge, which funds they have to impose a victim surcharge by law. It's about £80, and it goes towards funding victim services, which, you know, arguably a good thing, but who's actually the victim in this scenario? I'd argue she's probably more of the victim than Northern is in this case.
Yes, sounds like a victim surcharge here is actually surcharging the victim rather than a surcharge to help victims. But it is extraordinary. Have you spoken to anyone from Northern here? Because, I mean, looking at it from my perspective, it looks like a scam. It looks like they're deliberately hiding the information that a customer would need to know that their ticket was valid.
So in my specific case that I spoke to, actually, Karis told me that she'd bought her ticket from an actual manned ticket office and had shown her rail card. So that actually sounds like, you know, if I'm Karis is, I believe Karis 100%. So it seems like maybe even some members of staff at the railway essentially don't actually know about this morningly, you know, restriction on a ticket that's billed any time. But I've spoken to other people since publishing the story who have been who have bought their ticket through Northern's app. And if you go on Northern's app right now, you can find these tickets. You click them. It says anytime ticket, valid any time of day. And you click, even if you do click valid restrictions, you click it and it just says ticket valid any time of day. There's no mention of this. The only way that you can find this is if you look at the rail card terms and conditions themselves. It says that if you use this on a flexible ticket, so an anytime ticket or an off-peak ticket that is below £12 in value, before 10 a.m, Monday to Friday, and not in the months of July and August, then your ticket will be invalid.
Time.
So
I can't.
commuting time.
Yeah, I mean, I would just be. I can't tell you how angry I would be. I'm commuting to my job, which isn't that much over minimum wage. And I've got my rail card thinking I'm getting this little discount. And then I get slapped with a £460-odd fine. I mean, I'd be absolutely fuming.
No, and listening to all of those different conditions that must be met for the rail card to be valid, none of which are advertised publicly in big, bold font, or even on the application you're talking about. I mean, it's like these sort of comedy television programmes that you see, where, you haven't read the terms and conditions, you haven't now go and live in Antigua and stand on one leg and perform like monkeys.
The real problem with this, Tom, is that ticketing's just too difficult in this country. I mean, you only have to go to London, you can put your rail card on your Oyster card, you tap it, it will work it all out for you. If it's invalid at a certain time, it won't give you the discount. So you will never be fined for making this mistake, because you simply could not have made this mistake in London if your rail card was on your Oyster card, and it will expire off your Oyster card when the rail card expires. But you know, up north or in most parts of the UK, you've got to sort of remember all these conditions in admin yourself and work it out for yourself. I mean, you only have to go across the sea a few hundred miles to the Netherlands, and the whole country has you can just tap in and tap out on all the trains, buses and bikes. Whereas here we've created this quite absurd system that has given people criminal records
You're absolutely
based
right.
on a law
You're
that was drafted 100 years ago.
Yeah, they should just give you the benefit of the doubt and say, oh, OK, I've done something wrong, can I just pay the full price this time? But no, they slap you with all these extra fines. Thank you very much indeed. Jack Fairfield from Bolton News. Sorry, we'll have to end it there because we're coming to the end of the show.
Well, we must say, we did reach out to Northern for a statement and they just said everyone should buy a ticket.
Yeah.
It seems like a scandal. Extraordinary. But don't go anywhere. Martin Daubney is up next. We've been Good Afternoon Britain. Tom and Emily, see you tomorrow.
Despite the morning rain, it'll be a nice, warm, cosy day ahead. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome to your GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Well, to end the week, we've got sunny spells and showers, brisk winds, particularly in the north, and it is going to be feeling cold. And the reason for this is that we're dragging in some cold air from the Arctic, and that's spreading across the country, bringing that cold feel to end the week and into the weekend. So as soon as the sun goes down this evening and that cloud clears across England and Wales, it is going to be feeling chilly. Clear skies, light winds, so likely to see a lot of frost in rural spots and perhaps even some mist and fog by the morning. A different story across Scotland, far more cloud and some showers feeding through, particularly around coastal areas, but some also feeding in inland. And amongst those showers, this could fall as sleet and snow, particularly over hilly areas. Those blustery winds are also going to continue through into Friday morning, so quite a chilly start, plenty of showers and plenty of cloud around, and a few of those showers starting to feed in to western and northern coasts of Northern Ireland. Perhaps a few in northwestern coasts too, but elsewhere a largely dry and bright start. but it is going to be feeling cold and quite frosty and crisp to start the end of the week. Plenty of bright spells across the country too, but it is still going to be feeling cold. Lighter winds though, so not quite as cold as it was feeling this afternoon. Once again, still plenty of blustery showers across Scotland, so quite a damp day on offer here, but elsewhere plenty of dry and bright sunny spells. As I say, temperatures are still below average, so still cold, but not as cold as this afternoon in those lighter winds, but in those blustery winds in western parts of Scotland, that's really going to take the edge off of those temperatures. Into the evening, more of the same, still plenty of showers moving through across Scotland, Northern Ireland, but elsewhere plenty of clear skies. So another cold night ahead and some cold starts as we head into the weekend. Otherwise, that's it from me. Bye for now.
Woo! A chilly start will give way to a lovely, warm afternoon. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Your news, to be straight talking.
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope from